Welcome back, guys. We're back with another interesting story, which is on what if Bella Swan was actually Spider-Man's daughter? So don't forget to like and subscribe for more such videos. So let's get started. Human. My name is Isabella Marie Parker. My father's name is Peter Parker, and mother's name is Mary Jane Watson. Peter married Mary Jane when they turned 19 years old, after my father changed. Yes, my father is not human. He is considered Spider-Man to the outside world, but to me I just consider him Dad. When my father turned immortal at the age of 19, Mary Jane changed also. We aren't human and also not considered a normal family. Dad thinks that I will turn immortal too when I turn 18, that way he will always be considered older than me and always my father, even if it doesn't look it. My father is a handsome man with brown hair and bright blue eyes. Mom has long red hair and brown eyes, and both stuck in the ages of under 20 years old. I look a mixture of both of them. I would say that I have my father's face but my mother's eyes. I have long brown hair that goes all the way down to my waist that is very curly but with red streaks going through it when I am in the sunlight. Mom and Dad always say that I was given a natural beauty, but I always thought that I was plain, especially standing next to them. They're too beautiful, and for which most people practically drool over them. When I turned 10 years old, Dad told me about his special abilities. I learned that he has skin that can't be pierced by anything, not even blades of any sort. I also learned that all of his senses were heightened, so he could see, hear, and feel things that I could not. Peter told me that Mom was given the same abilities, but he won't allow her to do anything with it, saying she could get hurt. He also told me about his main ability with the webs. I was very impressed, but even Mom can't do that. They're also very fast. Dad says he can go faster than a car, so he takes me running sometimes also for fun. That's basically how we spend our family time, flying around or hanging out on buildings as Dad shows us his favorite sightseeing places. I love it very much to just feel the wind in my hair as businesses whir past us. It is one of the most amazing feelings I have ever felt in my entire life. To just let go and feel the earth at my fingertips is an extraordinary feeling and is not one to ever be passed up. Mom works as a singer and dancer. When we moved to New York, she auditioned for a career on Broadway and was accepted after only one small audition. Mom thinks it because of Dad's special gifts that he gave her, but he always tells her otherwise. Dad works at the newspaper taking pictures of Spider-Man. I find it ironical when I take a picture of him without his mask on and there is no money involved. So Mom and Dad make a good living in which they try to shower me with gifts all the time, but I always decline unless it's a new book. That's where I come in, thinking about how I am seemingly not even related to them. They're too perfect. In my school I don't have any friends, nothing more than just acquaintances. I don't fit in anywhere. I am an outsider to the world. That's how I became such a reading addict, and fell in love with the classics and never went back. I go to a private school, so things are kept relatively nice, not a lot of drama. I am not one to get picked on, and nor does anyone else for that matter. Things are always calm. Sadly, things aren't always strawberries and cream. There is always danger lurking in the shadows when nobody knows it's there. Whether it's in the form of drug dealer or a rapist, Dad's always out there trying to track them down and turn them into the police. He's always very good at doing that because he always catches around 3 to 5 people every night, thinking that they can get away with it even if it is something insignificant as stealing a purse. Dad keeps New York safe, in which many people are grateful for, but also many hold grudges against Dad and have tried to find him and reveal his real identity, but to no avail. We just look like a regular family to the outside world. That's just what Dad does. Once the criminals are turned in, we move on and keep the peace. I always think that he is going to get hurt someday, but he always reassures me that he will always be fine. He doesn't want Mom to be doing the same Spider-Man duties as him because she is not as strong as him. She was given all of the special gifts except for the main webs. Peter and Mary Jane's look and seem relatively human, but alas, are not. The day they stopped aging was the day that they didn't need to breathe anymore. They can both eat and drink human food, but it isn't a necessity. They say that it is just tasteless to them so that they can eat in front of humans if necessary. If they were to go into the doctor's office and get tested though, I am sure there would be a problem with a few of those blood tests. Dad says that I am slowly developing my powers. He tests my senses almost every day to see if they are getting better, and from what he can tell, things are going very well. I could tell that I was changing just by noticing that I don't fall every chance that I walked. I can actually go in a straight line without falling now. Ice is another story though. Dad and Mom always have much free time due to the fact that neither of them sleeps. Dad usually catches most people at night, but when a big robbery happens during the day he is always there, sometimes before he even knows it. His Spider-Man duties keep him out most of the night, but when he decided that the streets are clean of bad people he comes home to Mom and me. Mom never gets mad that Dad is out so late because she knows that he is just trying to help, and she even convinced me the same thing too. So during the night she just practices her dances for her current shows. Mary Jane teaches me how to dance, and sometimes Dad joins in also. They have taught me so many dances that I doubt that there is one that I have yet to learn. We don't have to move often, and when we do we just go to a different part of the city. New York is a large city, so it is easy to get lost in the sea of people. Nobody has ever called us out on our age. We usually move every 5 or so years, and Mom has to find a new job every time. Even though they all love her, I can tell that she wishes to stay on Broadway. She looks 19 years old, but in reality she is 45. Money is not a scarcity to us, as both of my parents' jobs pay well, so we can always afford a new nice house, and probably in 40 or 50 years we can move back to our original homes. We do travel often also. Whenever I get a break off for school, Mom and Dad take me somewhere new every time. They usually take me someplace sunny and warm, but now as the new school year starts in a few weeks I can't help but be nervous by the looks that I am receiving from them. They look incredibly guilty and nervous and are always casting their eyes away from mine. I can tell that something bad is about to happen soon. I can't help but fret at to what is about to come, because I had no idea that this was ever going to happen to me. As Mom and Dad sat me down on the chair and they both took the love seat, clasping hands together as if it were their lifeline. Bella, Dad started. Bella, Dad started again. I am sitting here watching my parents try to get some news across from me. I don't know what it is, but it looks bad to me. If they could be sweating, I'm sure I would have had to carry out the second bucket already. It has been 10 minutes, and all Daddy has said was my name twice. I doubt that's what he really wanted to say. I am screaming in my mind for him to just say what it is, but it looks like I am going to have to prompt him. Bella, I quoted him. Yes, well, and he stopped again. I doubt I have ever seen Spider-Man at a loss for words. Is there a problem of some sort? I started again. Yes, there is a problem. He took a deep, unneeded breath. I believe that someone has found out about my real identity. Another breath. So I don't think that it is safe for you here. I am going to send you to go live with your Aunt May and Uncle Ben, Dad told me hesitantly. What? I shrieked. We think that this is the best for you. Your powers have not fully developed, and so if someone were to find out whom you were, they could hurt you badly, Mom said slowly, sorrowful. My skin is as strong as Daddy's, so there is no issue on me being hurt, but you are a different story. She would be crying if she could. I understand, I said slowly with my head down, not willing to look either of my parents in the eye. When do I leave? You leave in 3 days. Mom got all your paperwork sent over to the new school. It is not a private school this time, so you could make some friends easily without any trouble, Mom smiled. I got up and went to my bedroom. This was too depressing. I have never been without my parents for more than a week tops, and I hardly know my aunt and uncle. We would go and see them every other year, and it is obvious that they know what Mom and Dad are because they weren't aging. Aunt May and Uncle Ben were worried that Dad could get hurt at first, but now they know the full truth. Uncle Ben and Aunt May live in a small town in Forks. I have only been to the town about 3 times, and only for Christmas. They were very nice people, but I just don't know them that well. Aunt May and I talk easily, but I just don't like the idea of taking over their home for however long it takes to get rid of the threat. Knock knock, Bella dear, can I come in? Mom asked through the door. Yes, I answered in a small voice, knowing full and well that she heard me clearly. Mom opened the door and took a seat on the bed hesitantly. Bella, we only do these things for you. We both love you so much, and we don't know what to do without you. You are our firstborn daughter, and you have still not grasped how much we love you, Mom told me sadly. I know you love me, I just don't see why, I told her truthfully. What do you mean, sweetie? She was obviously confused. Why do you do this? I am not an important person, even if I am not completely human, I explained. Bella, no, you are special, you just don't see it. When you smile your eyes light up, and you glow, to me and your mother, you are an angel on earth. You may not have had many friends here at this school, but knowing you and how easy it is just to be with you, I am sure that I would have to beat them away with a stick by the time you have to come home, Dad told me, coming through the door and sitting opposite of Mom. I love you, Daddy, I told him, hugging him. I love you, Mommy, I hugged her also. I guess that I should start packing. Does Uncle Ben and Aunt May know that I am coming? I sure hope that they know.
Yes, and they are excited to see you again. Even Uncle Ben squealed when I told him. Dad laughed.
That's a good sign. I certainly don't want any issues with them not wanting me there for however long this time is. I packed for a couple of hours with Mom and Dad's help. I managed to get things done quicker than I thought possible. Dad said that there would even be a special surprise waiting for me when I get there, and that there were no take-backs on it. I was suspicious to say at the least. Dad was nervous about me leaving and refused to catch any criminals while I was still in the city, so I obviously considered myself the guilty party for this action of his and offered to leave sooner, but he wasn't having that, and nor was Mom. With Mom having to quit her job again, she told me not to worry because she didn't really like the job, but I could still see the sacrifice behind her eyes. She loved dancing and singing, it was just her.
Mom decided that while I am gone that she could make herself busy and graduate from college. With her harboring so much free time, she would need something to keep herself from worrying about me. I called her a worry wart and asked her what could really happen to me in such a small town. She smiled sadly at me and promised to call every day, twice a day.
The days before I left went by so quickly I would have thought someone pushed the button for fast forward. Dad and Mom hardly left me alone, and I was glad for that because I know that I am going to miss them both terribly. They took me to the water park, we played out in the sun, and even had a picnic in the park. I felt free these past couple of days, almost invincible. There was nothing holding me down, no school, no criminals, no public lies, just Dad, Mom and I felt exhilarated just to be here with them. Those 3 days were some of the best days of my life. I would never forget them. I know that Mom and Dad were just doing it so I could remember good times while I am not with them. I just hope that I don't have to be gone that long. Mom and Dad walked with me to the private plane and made sure that I got on all right. I could tell that they would have been crying, but they obviously couldn't. Mom was dry sobbing into Dad's arms when they thought that I couldn't see them, and Dad had a faraway wistful look in his eyes as he held Mom. It took a lot of willpower for me to not cry too. It was a sad day for us.
The flight was long, too long. The flight's attendants were actually nice, but I guess that's what you get when you charter your own plane. I ordered a lot of food on the plane, lots of peanuts and Coke. I never had a high tolerance for caffeine, but it seemed appropriate. I didn't fall asleep the entire plane ride, and when we finally arrived to SeaTac Airport, I was exhausted.
I spotted my aunt and uncle easily. They both stood by the unloading gate with big smiles on their aged faces. They really were nice people. "Hi, Aunt May, Uncle Ben," I greeted the couple. "Bella." They were excited. "How are you doing? How was your flight? We have so much to do." Okay, so I underestimated how happy they were. "I am fine. The plane trip was fine, and it was long, but I didn't get to sleep," I explained. They calmed down after a bit and we made our way out to their car. It was an older Cadillac that was clearly years old, but they act like they just got it by keeping it clean and neat. Aunt May chatted the entire way about my room, saying that I get to use Dad's old room when he lived with them, and how Mary Jane used to live next door. It was really sweet, how they met as children and grew to love each other more each day. Uncle Ben keeps telling me how much I look like Mary Jane at my age too. I swear to you, you guys could practically be twins, but you have your dad's face though, Uncle Ben explained. When we finally arrived, there was something very new and noticeable in the old neighborhood. There, sitting in the free parking space, is a brand new car. Mom and Dad are in trouble. I narrowed my eyes at the vehicle. Please tell me that this is not the present that Mom and Dad were talking about, I practically begged them. MJ said that you would put up a fight. They both laughed. I scowled. It was shiny, silver, and visibly expensive. It was going to stick out here big time. Just by looking around at the rest of the neighborhood I could tell that no one has much money. I was used to fancy cars and new things, but that was in New York. This is Washington. I'm sure people don't spend much money in simple things in life, although they look like they appreciate them. This new car is a 2010 Infiniti FX50. A.N. Picture on profile. This would definitely attract unneeded attention in this small town. The thought made me shudder. Well, I guess that I will try it out when I go to school tomorrow, I told them, sadly. I was hoping for something preferably used. Mom told me that I could make friends easily here, but now I know that if I were to actually make friends, then it would be because they like me for my money. I don't mind though. I don't need friends. I have my parents and books to keep myself occupied. That's another thing altogether too. Humans die. People like my parents and I don't. It would be pointless anyways, seeing as I hardly know how long I am going to be here, so no point in wasting other people's time. Problem resolved. Dad was very defensive on the phone when I asked him how much the car costs. He has some excellent safety features, he told me. Oh Peter, knock it off, she just wants to fit in. I could hear Mom arguing in the background. Fine, I could have gone cheaper, but I could have gone more pricey. I could hear Dad grinning through the phone. I sighed. Okay, you win this round, but don't you dare think that you can get away with ever buying me a car again, and if I have to have you sign a contract. He laughed, but I could hear the hesitancy in his laugh. I knew he wouldn't agree to that, so he quickly handed the phone to Mom. Hey baby. How are you doing down there? She was worried. Fine, Mom. Do you know when my clothes are going to be here? I knew that this would get her mind off of me not being there. Yes, the rest of your clothes should be there by tomorrow. That includes some new clothes that I purchased a few days ago and didn't have time to give you. She finished the last part quickly. Mary Jane had an addiction to shopping. It was at least once a week, and in that time she could buy someone an entirely new wardrobe. She even designs some of her own clothes. She fixes up Dad's Spider-Man outfit when it gets ripped, so she can sew pretty well also. My now much minimized selection of clothes held very little. Mom always makes me wear dresses with her, so it looks like that's what I'll wear. I have never once in my life worn a pair of jeans. I decided that I would wear my black dress with my long bodycoat. Dad always laughed when I wore it, saying that I looked like a secret agent. Mom and I joined in that laughter, and it was funny. I did have a feeling that I could handle my small pair of black heels. I awoke with a start with Aunt May shaking my shoulders. Bella, you need to get up, school today, she told me happily. I looked at the clock. 6 a.m. It was just too early. I doubt even humans get up this early. I am up, Aunt May, I told her, the opposite of her own mood. You should be excited about your first day at school, Bella. Your father was the same as you know? Well, this was certainly news to me. I made a mental note to ask him why he didn't like school, and I doubt it's for the same reasons of me. My room was just like Dad's personality. He had blue wallpaper with little white spider webs dotted all over it in intricate patterns. On the walls hung posters of people he admires like Einstein. His bookshelf was extensive and held many scientific books. He also had a large computer in the corner by the window that looked over to the house next door with the boarded-up windows. I got up, took a shower, and slipped on my dress, tights, and shoes. I looked in the mirror, and fixed up my hair. I never did care that much about my looks, but I knew that Mom would be proud when I sent her today's picture of me. That's correct, her and Dad want a picture of me every day to prove my safety. And I am also guessing so Mom can comment on my wardrobe. N. Posted on profile. I really would like some comments too, thanks. I fixed up my curls so they looked halfway decent and went down to see Aunt May and Uncle Ben sitting at the table eating breakfast. Why don't you look lovely, dear? May complimented me. Yes, but what does your father say about wearing that short of a dress? Ben was concerned about Dad. Mom always dresses me for the day, and Dad has already seen me in this dress, I told them both. Well, you get to take your new car to school today. Are you excited? I groaned at Uncle Ben's question. Yep, perfect. Dad said last night that it has a good safety feature. That's why he bought it for me, I said, exasperated. I still can't believe that he would spend that much on a car for however little time I would be here. I ate a quick breakfast, brushed my teeth, and headed out the door. I was nervous about today, but I figured that it would be similar to all my other schools that I had been to in the past. My car was nicer than I thought it would be, and that's saying something, and it was no doubt about it, new. I wouldn't have found the school easily if it didn't have a large, "Welcome to Forks High School" sign in the front of it. There weren't very many people there yet, but the few people that were just gawking at me. I didn't know that I looked that bad. I made my way to the main office and found a lady with blotchy red hair in the chair behind the desk. Hello. I am Isabella Parker. I am new here, I told the lady. She quickly handed me the papers, and told me to bring back my schedule signed at the end of the day. My first 4 classes passed without much delay. Some of the teachers made me introduce myself and I cursed them mentally. I hated attention, and that was the perfect way to get it. Every time class ended, somebody would make their way up to me and introduce themselves, some braver than the others. I certainly didn't like the extra attention, but it was a good thing that I expected as much. Every time class would start, even when I was sitting in the back of the classroom, students would turn their heads and continue to stare. I felt like I was in a zoo the entire day. It was finally lunch and I was glad a girl named Jessica asked me to sit with her friends. She talked a lot and I could tell that she was the school gossiper, just what I needed, I thought bitterly. Her friends were nice and some were a bit overly helpful, including boys like Mike and Eric. Everybody asked how I was liking Forks so far, and all I could do was lie. It's great, my aunt and uncle are very nice people, at least the last part was the truth. I could tell that Jessica was enjoying being the center of attention now, she was practically glowing from it. I could tell that Jessica was envious of my clothing, as I was hers. I met an actual nice person though, her name was Angela and I could clearly tell that she was the shy type. That's when I saw them. They were sitting in the corner of the cafeteria, as far away from where I sat as possible in the long room. There were 5 of them. They weren't talking, and they weren't eating, though they each had a tray of untouched food in front of them. They weren't gawking at me, unlike most of the other students, so it was safe to stare at them without fear of meeting an excessively interested pair of eyes. But it was none of these things that caught, and held, my attention. They didn't look anything alike. Of the 3 boys, one was big, muscled like a serious weightlifter, with dark, curly hair. Another was taller, leaner, but still muscular, and honey blonde. The last was lanky, less bulky, with untidy, bronze-colored hair. He was more boyish than the others, who looked like they could be in college, or even teachers here rather than students. The girls were opposites. The tall one was statuesque. She had a beautiful figure, the kind you saw on the cover of the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, the kind that made every girl around her take a hit on her self-esteem just by being in the same room. Her hair was golden, gently waving to the middle of her back. The short girl was pixie-like, thin in the extreme, with small features. Her hair was a deep black, cropped short and pointing in every direction. And yet, they were all exactly alike. Every one of them was chalky pale, the palest of all the students living in this sunless town. They all had very dark eyes despite the range in hair tones. They also had dark shadows under those eyes, purplish, bruise-like shadows. As if they were all suffering from a sleepless night, or almost done recovering from a broken nose. Though their noses, all their features, were straight, perfect, and angular. But all this is not why I couldn't look away. I stared because their faces, so different, so similar, were all devastatingly, inhumanly beautiful. They were faces you never expected to see except perhaps on the airbrushed pages of a fashion magazine. Or painted by an old master as the face of an angel. It was hard to decide who was the most beautiful, maybe the perfect blonde girl, or the bronze-haired boy. They were all looking away, away from each other, away from the other students, away from anything in particular as far as I could tell. As I watched, the small girl rose with her tray, unopened soda, unbitten apple, and walked away with a quick, graceful lope that belonged on a runway. I watched, amazed at her lithe dancer's step, till she dumped her tray and glided through the back door, faster than I would have thought possible. My eyes darted back to the others, who sat unchanging. Who are they? As she looked up to see who I meant. Though already knowing, probably, from my tone, suddenly he looked at her, the thinner one, the boyish one, the youngest, perhaps. He looked at my neighbor for just a fraction of a second, and then his dark eyes flickered to mine. He looked away quickly, more quickly than I could, though in a flush of embarrassment I dropped my eyes at once. In that brief flash of a glance, his face held nothing of interest. It was as if she had called his name, and he'd looked up in involuntary response, already having decided not to answer. My neighbor giggled in embarrassment, looking at the table like I did. That's Edward and Emmett Cullen, and Rosalie and Jasper Hale. The one who left was Alice Cullen. They all live together with Dr. Cullen and his wife. She said this under her breath. I glanced sideways at the beautiful boy, who was looking at his tray now, picking a bagel to pieces with long, pale fingers. His mouth was moving very quickly, his perfect lips barely opening. The other 3 still looked away, and yet I felt he was speaking quietly to them. They are very nice looking. I struggled with the conspicuous understatement. Yes. Jessica agreed with another giggle. They're all together though, Emmett and Rosalie, and Jasper and Alice, I mean. And they live together. Her voice held all the shock and condemnation of the small town, I thought critically. But, if I was being honest, I had to admit that even in New York, it would cause gossip. Which ones are the Cullens? I asked. They don't look related. Oh, they're not. Dr. Cullen is really young, in his 20s or early 30s. They're all adopted. The Hales are brother and sister, twins. The blondes, and their foster children. They look a little old for foster children. They are now, Jasper and Rosalie are both 18, but they've been with Mrs. Cullen since they were 8. She's their aunt or something like that. That's really kind of nice, for them to take care of all those kids like that, when they're so young and everything. I guess so, Jessica admitted reluctantly, and I got the impression that she didn't like the doctor and his wife for some reason. With the glances she was throwing at their adopted children, I would presume the reason was jealousy. I was about to speak out against her when she said something else that just fueled my rage against this pitiful girl. I think that Mrs. Cullen can't have any kids, though, she added, as if it lessened their kindness. You know you shouldn't judge them. She looked up at me dumbly. I am sure Mrs. Cullen is a wonderful woman, and you just can't see past your own jealousy to open your eyes and see what kind of selfless woman would do that. I was now standing, and glared at her. I grabbed my jacket and left the cafeteria without a second glance. I was steaming on this inside. How can someone judge a person without even knowing them? Mrs. Cullen sounds like a wonderful person, and yet I am guessing that Jessica got turned down by one of the boys in the family, and she takes it out on gossiping rumors. It's sick. Of course, because I got Jessica mad, I was sure to be a big topic tomorrow, even more so today. I just knew it. I groaned as I headed out to my next class. I left toward my next class and found the biology room easily. I was early, so Mr. Banner told me to take a seat in the back of the classroom. I read for about 10 minutes before students started piling in the room. I barely noticed when the chair next to me moved. I didn't look up. When class finally did start, I looked over to my new neighbor. He was one of the Cullens. I smiled at him until I saw his expression. It was murderous, and the thought if looks could kill ran through my mind. Maybe he heard my little rant to Jessica earlier and is mad that I made a scene about his family. I would have to apologize. I looked over at him to see him looking straight ahead in the front of the classroom, without so much as a second glance from his beautiful face. The entire class was like this. I would try to sneak small glances through the curtain of my hair, and he wouldn't spare me a second glance. I tried to apologize, but I was too scared. Of what I wasn't sure, but I knew I was scared. Rejection maybe? I don't know, but when class ended he was out of the room faster than I would have thought possible. I made it through gym pretty easily since I didn't have to dress down and just watch for the day, but I was required to bring new gym clothes for tomorrow. I called Mom when class was done and I was heading out to my car. Bella, sweetheart, is that you? Mom asked happily. Yeah, Mom, I just finished school today. I was also wondering if you were sending anything that I could wear for gym in my wardrobe, I asked hopefully. I didn't think that there would be any stores around here for shorts. Yes, there should be a few pairs of sweatshorts in your luggage. Also, your Aunt May called and said that your luggage arrived today. I was at my car now. I noticed all of the Cullens were staring at me. I sent an apologetic glance at them. They had either annoyed or confused faces on. Okay, Mom. I'll call you and Dad tonight. I'm about to get in the car, I told her. Bye, honeybee. Talk to you tonight, she sang happily into the phone. I wanted to ask about Dad, but that could wait until tonight. Bye, Mom. Love you. I smiled as I hung up and got in the car, which cheered up my mood greatly. I made my way home easily and found that Aunt May was still at home straightening things up around the place. Hey, Aunt May, I greeted her. Bella, how was your first day at school? She was excited. Fine, I need to bring gym clothes tomorrow, I made a face. Bella, I don't think that you need to worry about your natural clumsiness much longer. You should know that your father was also very clumsy at your age too, she laughed. He was really? This was also news to me. The man that I thought had no flaws was once clumsy. Yes, he could barely walk a straight line until he turned around 10 years old, and he still had issues. You know, if he wasn't Spider-Man, he would be in a full body cast by his current age. I always expected it. She sighed and chuckled a bit. I did the same. Our conversation finished up, and I promised to make dessert for tomorrow night, because she wouldn't let me in the kitchen to make dinner. I unpacked all of my new clothes, and found some shorts easily. I cleaned out Dad's old closet and put all of his clothes under the bed while I replaced his clothes with mine. It was a small closet and I knew that if Mom saw it now she would not approve. I chuckled to myself as I thought of her new reaction to his room. I also noticed a broken lamp in the corner of the room. I wondered what happened there. Okay, those of you who had seen the Spider-Man movie knows what happened. Lol. When I got a closer look I could see one of Dad's webs hooked to the side of it. Now I could piece together what happened to the lamp. I cleaned the room for about an hour by getting rid of old trash and dusting. I left everything the same except for a few straightening that needed to be fixed, like said lamp. I ate dinner with Ben and May, brushed my teeth and went to bed. My dreams were consisting of a certain pair of black and golden eyes from earlier that day. A.N. Guess who? Answer Edward, giggles. The next day I woke up early with my new alarm clock and got dressed quickly. A.N. On profile. By the way, you should know that I really screwed with her wardrobe. I truly hated it in the Twilight movies, other when Alice picked it. I fixed my hair into a bun at the top of my head, put on my tights and black heels. I was ready. I ate breakfast hurriedly, noticing that I was running a bit behind, brushed my teeth, and headed out. See you guys tonight, I called to my aunt and uncle. They wished me a good day, and I was out the door a minute later. I arrived at school 5 minutes before the bell rung, so I made my way quickly to the first class. I could tell by the way people were looking at me that the rumors had already started. When people whispered now, I just turned my head and focused on something else. It was one thing to know that there are rumors about you. It's another thing altogether to actually hear it. Once classes finished and I was making my way to the lunchroom, I found that someone was pulling me back. Hello, I am Alice Cullen. Would you like to sit with me at lunch today? She questioned happily. Oh, I don't know, I stated hesitantly. I thought that they would be mad at me. Nonsense, let's go. She pulled on my hand with her freezing cold one. It reminded me of my parents' hands, they were always freezing too. The lunchroom went completely quiet when Alice and I walked in. I thought that I could hear a pin drop from across the room. That didn't faze Alice in the least. She kept talking all about shopping and new outfits. It was intriguing to see someone have a love for shopping as much as Mom does. We got lunch and sat down quickly. Nobody was talking in the entire lunchroom. It was eerie. I was not one for the dramatics and stood up. I didn't even have to stop Alice from talking, as she stopped mid-sentence and looked up at me with a smile, as if she knew what I was going to do. She gave me a nod of encouragement. Do you all mind? I am trying to eat lunch. Didn't your parents tell you it's rude to stare? I yelled at everyone. They all just looked at me dumbly. Idiots, I mumbled under my breath. Suddenly a loud laugh brought me out of my annoyed state. I looked over to see the largest Cullen laughing boisterously. I giggled with him, and so did Alice. Jasper started chuckling as Emmett's loud guffaws of laughter slowed down. The situation was quite comical. I also noticed that the other Cullen wasn't here. I wondered where he was. I hoped that he was okay. Slowly everyone around the cafeteria started with their own lunches and conversations. Good God, that was eerie. I voiced my thoughts. Damn girl. That was hilarious. Emmett chortled one last time before the blonde girl smacked him over the head. I giggled, as did Alice. Sorry, we haven't been properly introduced. I am Bella Parker. I introduced myself. Well, I am Emmett. This pretty lady is Rosalie. He gestured to the now beaming blonde woman. Nice to meet you, Rosalie, Emmett. I smiled kindly at them and they both smiled back. Well, as you know, I am Alice, and this is my husband Jasper. I heard them all gasp quietly. I looked down at their hands, but I didn't see wedding bands. I was confused. Why don't you wear wedding rings then? I questioned curiously. People are very judgmental, and we didn't like to cause more gossip than it already is. She smiled sadly. You shouldn't be ashamed of your marriage. My parents got married at 19. Mom still calls him her soulmate. I smiled at the memory. You are completely right, Bella. This is my fabulous wife Rosalie. Emmett smiled proudly at the practically shining with joy Rosalie. So what is your surname? I asked both of the couples curiously. Mine is McCarty and Alice's is Whitlock, Rosalie explained. That's nice. I smiled at the happy couples. Alice started chatting animatedly about shopping again, and Rosalie even put in her opinions on occasion. She asked me all about my favorite shops, and where the best places to go shopping in New York are. Also saying that we would go shopping soon. That's where I drew the line. Actually, Alice, my mother picks all my outfits out for the day. I smiled apologetically. I thought you were living with your aunt and uncle, Alice asked confused. I am, but still across the country. She still manages to check what I wear. I sighed heavily. No wonder she received the name Wonder Woman. From me, and Dad agreed easily, while she laughed. She lets you wear those clothes, Jasper commented, eyeing my outfit. Yes, I answered warily. No pants? Emmett asked. I was surprised he was even paying attention. Nope, I've never worn a pair of jeans in my life. Mom thinks dresses or skirts are more ladylike, I answered truthfully. They all laughed and I joined in, Mom and her clothes. And my mom is actually like that, so I am speaking from experience lol. We chatted easily until I noticed that we had about 5 minutes left until next class, then I remember the other missing Cullen in my mental note from earlier. Don't you guys have another brother? He sat next to me in biology yesterday. I more commented than asked, I didn't want to be rude. They all tensed the slightest bit. I wouldn't have seen it if I didn't have my more improved vision. Yes, Edward is out sick today. He should be back in a couple of days, Alice answered hesitantly. We'll tell him I hope he feels better, I sighed, concerned. We all left for our next class, and biology went by way too slow. I kept hoping Edward would come back to school soon. Gym went by much faster and I was practically glowing with pride with myself. I didn't trip once, I wasn't in the game that often but I was still there, and I couldn't be happier in this moment. Alice skipped over to me when I was about to get into my car. What are you so happy about? I didn't trip once in gym, I explained, not even somewhat able to keep the smile off my face. I am guessing that you used to be a very clumsy person then, she laughed and I did as well. Yes, so what do you need? I asked her, remembering that I was about to go home. Well, I know that your mom does your shopping, but how about we go down to Seattle tomorrow after school? She sounded so hopeful, there was no way that I could turn her down. Sure Alice, that sounds like fun, I told her smiling. She hugged me tightly until I was gasping for breath. Alice too tight, I managed to gasp out. Sorry, she apologized, letting go instantly. I do know that we are going to be best friends. She smiled once more before dancing away merrily. I thought over that as I drove home and started working on homework. A friend, wow, the idea of it was interesting. I liked the sound of Alice as a friend. Mom and Dad were ecstatic when I told them about Alice and the Cullens. Oh darling, it sounds just wonderful. What are they like? Mom tone was curious. Well, Alice reminds me of you because she loves to go shopping, and she invited me to go shopping tomorrow also, I told her, smiling at the memory of Alice wanting to do something with me. Sounds like fun dear, I want to see pictures. I could hear her talking to Dad in the background. All right, your father wants to talk to you. Good night sweetheart, she told me. Bye, Mom. Love you, I smiled. Bella, how are you, sweetie? Dad asked happily. Just fine, what about you? I was curious of how things were going with the guy trying to expose us, but Dad never liked to involve work and home life together, saying that they needed to always remain separate things. Fine dear, now I hear that you are going shopping tomorrow. Yes, with Alice. Why? Nothing too short please. When you do come home I don't want to be the one beating the boys off with that stick we talked about the other day. I laughed and I could hear Mom laughing also, obviously listening in. Dad was also chuckling. All right Daddy, I promise, I conceded, giggling. Thank you dear, good night and sweet dreams, Dad told me. Night Daddy, I hung up. Sleep found me easily that night and I slept through some wonderful dreams about a certain boy with golden eyes just like the night before. The next morning went by like usual, and I could easily see a routine forming without me even being aware of it. I did wake up a bit earlier than normal, leaving me an hour to bide my time before I got ready for school. I went over to the bookshelf and pulled out a dusty book that had a bunch of notes written on certain pages. My curiosity piqued. The book was called Quantum Enigma, Physics Encounters Consciousness. I read through the hour easily. Reading Dad's notes and what he was reading was fascinating, and when I talked to him in the morning, he even gave me some more information that has been discovered from it. I got dressed quickly, on profile, made my way downstairs and had a quick breakfast with May and Ben. I hurriedly brushed my teeth, grabbed Dad's book, and said a quick goodbye to Aunt May and Uncle Ben before rushing out the door towards school. Today I made it with 10 minutes to spare before class. Alice was waiting when I got out of the car. She gave me a quick hug and complimented my outfit. Oh Bella, I just love your dress. Red is definitely your color. We are going to have to get you some red clothes when we go shopping, she squealed. Sure Alice. I looked down at her. With my high heels and her short height I stood over a foot above her. The situation was humorous and apparently Emmett thought the same thing. When we approached the others, he was the first one to comment. Bella, you shouldn't wear such high heels when you're hanging out with Shorty here. He laughed and Jasper chuckled while Alice glared. It will be fine, Alice. When we go shopping today, you can pick out some heels of your own, I told her. At the mere mention of shopping, her face brightened up and she was practically glowing. Jasper looked a little dazed. That got her started again, and Rosalie joined in as we waited for the first bell to ring. The first classes of the day passed by quickly and it was soon lunch. All of the Cullens were already there and looked utterly bored. Bored? I questioned with a smile. What gave it away? Emmett asked sarcastically. I just go into auto mode. I honestly couldn't tell you what happened in my first classes, I told him, laughing, glad that I wasn't focused on morning classes or I would be as bored as them. Cool. What button do you push? His serious face made me doubt his sanity. The whole table looked at him. Maybe this was confirming their suspicions. I broke out into laughter first and was soon followed by the rest of the Cullens, although Emmett looked a bit confused. Oh, Emmett. I pulled out Dad's old science book and read it through lunch, while snacking on my sandwich. The others talked amongst themselves while I was deep in the book. Jasper was first to talk to me this time. Bella, did you not finish your homework? He asked in mock serious voice. No, I did. Why? I asked, confused. What was he getting at? Then why are you reading a science book? He seemed confused by the very idea of it. This is my father's old book when he went to high school. I am just reading over his notes on the subject, I told them truthfully. Oh great, we got a nerd disguised as a hot chick. Emmett laughed loudly at his comment while I was sporting a new shade of red on my face and neck. Thanks a lot, Emmett, I thought bitterly. Emmett, shut up, I snapped at him, and then I remembered someone else. How's Edward doing? Any better? I was hoping that I could see him again. He has been starring in my dreams. I would like match up the eyes to the real person. Yes, he is getting better. He should be in school in a few days, Alice told me, smiling, but there was something in her eyes, like it wasn't the complete truth, and she was skirting the real issue. Well, it must be nice to have a doctor in the house then. My mom is going to school to be a nurse, but that's only to pass the time. She is a much better singer, I told them, thinking about Mary Jane. Your mother is a singer? Rosalie questioned, seeming intrigued. Yes, she was on Broadway but quit so she had more time with me. Now I was getting depressed thinking about her. I suddenly felt very calm. It was an odd feeling, especially in this sad moment of my life. What was causing it? I looked at the faces of my friends, and I had strong suspicion that it was Jasper, although that sounds crazy. Something was telling me that he was causing it. I smiled at them. Something was surely odd about them. I might not have had many friends before, but they were certainly stranger than regular teenagers. The bell rung, signaling the end of classes, and I made my way to biology alone again. I was getting really worried about him now. Biology always seems to pass slower than the rest of classes, even if I put myself into auto mode. I missed a person that I hardly knew, and it was getting pathetic on my part. Gym, being my last class, passed by quickly and I soon found myself in the silver Volvo of theirs. The shopping trip turned out to be fun. I always had fun with Mom, but going with Alice and Rosalie made it fun too. Alice kept making me try on anything blue. I didn't understand why it had to be blue, but I ended up with a lot of blue and a promise to Alice to wear blue at least once a week. Alice knows Edward's favorite color is blue on her. When the day finally came to an end, I was exhausted. From the long 2-hour drive from Seattle, even though they are super speeders, they had to watch out for cops, and it looked like she knew where all of their hiding spots were because she kept slowing down when we passed one. All in all, it was a fun and interesting day. I bought a few new dresses, and some new shoes, mostly heels. I also helped Alice pick out some shoes for her new clothes. The boutiques in Seattle were cute and interesting, and I was sure that Mary Jane would love to hear about it all, and when I called her a few hours later, she sure did. Of course, Dad wanted to see all the dresses and how short they were before I wear them out in public. I could hear Mom smack the back of his head through the phone, and I chuckled. They never got into fights, but Mom would sure get annoyed a lot. I said good night to everyone, and then when homework was finished and I was tired, I went to bed. My dreams continued of the mysterious boy who is still missing from school. The next day I made sure to wake up an hour early for school. I had something important to do this morning. I went down to the kitchen and started cutting up a bunch of vegetables, and poured some broth in a saucepan. I am going to make Edward some get well soon soup. I hope that he will enjoy it. I made breakfast for May and Ben, and went to get dressed. Today I wore a sliming black and white dress. Look on my profile. I fixed my hair so it hung in curls around my face, brushed my teeth, said another quick goodbye with a kiss to the cheek, and left the house towards school. All my friends were waiting for me when I arrived and all huddled by my door. They looked like penguins. I fought hard to keep in my laughter. "Hey guys," I greeted them. "Hey Bella, what's up?" I remembered the soup and figured I should give it to them so I don't forget later. "Here, I made soup for Edward. It's vegetable soup, and healthy. Tell him I hope he gets well soon." I leaned back in the car and grabbed the thermos containing the soup. "Can you give it to him after school?" I handed Alice the soup. "Thanks Bella. I am sure Edward will really appreciate this." She smiled, but it looked like she was trying to hold in a laugh. I didn't understand it one bit and just made me confused. "Jasper, go put this in the car please." She handed it to Jasper, and he left to the car. "So Bella, when are we going shopping again? We can go to Olympia this time." She smiled at the idea. The rest of the week passed without incident, and I soon found it Saturday night. Alice asked me if I wanted to go to club, but I declined, but not until I promised to go next weekend with the entire group. Which in fact they all looked excited about. The rest of the weekend passed easily, with my dreams of Edward never subsiding. I read for the most part, just flipping through some more of Dad's books. To see his personal theories on different ideas and then to compare them to my own is intriguing. When Monday finally rolled around, I had a quick breakfast then went to get dressed. I had a feeling today would be a good day, so I dressed my mood, with confident red dress. N. Profile. I fixed my hair in a tight bun above my head, finished a few things around the house and headed out. Alice came bouncing up to me, automatically eyeing my dress. "Bella, you look amazing." I blushed at her comment and looked down. "Where is everyone else?" I looked around and saw them over by the car, surrounding Edward. "Oh, is Edward feeling better?" I asked, concerned. "Yes, but I wanted to talk to you about which club we are going to this weekend," she squealed, and I whined. "Alice, you realize that you are forcing me to go, and that I have no say over the matter, so you can pick it," I grumbled to her. Happily, she laughed and dragged me over to my first class, passing the rest of the Cullens. "Jasper, I think that Mrs. Whitlock has gone crazy," I informed him as we quickly passed by the group. "Oh, I've known that for a while now," they all laughed. My morning classes passed by quickly and it was soon lunch. Everybody was already seated when I arrived 5 minutes early before the regular crowd. There were only a few people just arriving. "Geez, you guys, did you skip class or what?" I questioned, laughing. They were odd sometimes. "Nope, we just left early. Class was boring us. We just all arrived like a minute ago," Alice told me. "All right. So Alice, did you pick a club yet?" I questioned as I started picking apart my sandwich and slowly eating it. "Nope, but there are some good ones. I would appreciate your input." Her eyes were pleading. "Sorry, Alice, I don't know how to pick a club, as I have never been to one before. Also, you should take into account that I am being forced against my will." My voice was sarcastic and annoyed. "Oh, but Bella, you are going to thank me for this," she sang merrily. "I doubt it," I mumbled under my breath. I heard a melodic chuckle and turned to face Edward's stiff form. I smiled at him and pulled out my current book. "So Edward are feeling better? Alice said that you got some kind of bug." I worried for him. "Oh yes, she even gave me the soup you gave her. I was delicious," he told me, smiling. There was amusement in his golden eyes. "Well, that's good. Did you have a good time away from school?" I chuckled as I looked around. Some people were still staring. I noticed Jessica was glaring at me and I glared right back at her. She was the first to turn away and I heard numerous chuckles from my table. Is it possible for someone to turn senile even if you're in high school? I motioned towards Jessica, and Emmett roared with laughter, and the rest of the table chuckled along with us. I read the rest of lunch and made my way to biology 5 minutes before the bell rung. "All right, I am headed out. Bye guys." I smiled and left the table. I could feel a certain pair of eyes on me but ignored it. Biology would certainly be an interesting class today, especially since we're doing a lab. I was a few minutes early for biology, so I pulled out my notepad and started drawing random circles. A few seconds later I heard the chair next to me scrape, announcing the arrival of Edward. "Hello," said a quiet musical voice. I didn't say anything for fear of making a fool of myself. He was sitting as far away from me as the desk allowed, but his chair was angled toward me. His hair was dripping wet, disheveled. Even so, he looked like he'd just finished shooting a commercial for hair gel. His dazzling face was friendly, open, a slight smile on his flawless lips. But his eyes were careful. "My name is Edward Cullen," he continued. "I know that we didn't get off to the best of starts, so I would like to try again," he smiled pallidly. "Well then, it is nice to meet you, officially," I smiled at him slightly. Mr. Banner started class at that moment. I tried to concentrate as he explained the lab we would be doing today. The slides in the box were out of order. Working as lab partners, we had to separate the slides of onion root tip cells into the phases of mitosis they represented and label them accordingly. We weren't supposed to use our books. In 20 minutes, Mr. Banner would be coming around to see who had it right. "Get started," Mr. Banner commanded. "Ladies first, partner?" Edward asked. I looked up to see him smiling a crooked smile so beautiful that I could only stare at him like an idiot. "Or I could start, if you wish." The smile faded. He was obviously wondering if I was mentally competent. "No," I said, flushing. "I'll go ahead. I had done this lab last year at my old school, so I knew what I was looking for in the microscope. It should be easy." I snapped the first slide into place under the microscope and adjusted it quickly to the 40x objective. I studied the slide briefly. My assessment was confident. "Prophase. Do you mind if I look?" he asked as I began to remove the slide. His hand caught mine, to stop me, as he asked. His fingers were ice cold, like he'd been holding them in a snowdrift before class, the same as Alice's. It was strange to touch his cold fingers. When I felt Alice's, they were cold but not like Edward's. No, when I touched Edward's hand a strange electricity hummed in the air and touched my body. It was the most exhilarating thing that I had ever felt, and I was even more weirded out by my reaction, and Edward's. "I'm sorry," he muttered, pulling his hand back immediately. However, he continued to reach for the microscope. I watched him, still staggered, as he examined the slide for an even shorter time than I had. "Prophase," he agreed, writing it neatly in the first space on our worksheet. He swiftly switched out the first slide for the second, and then glanced at it cursorily. "Anaphase," he murmured, writing it down as he spoke. I kept my voice indifferent. "May I?" He smirked and pushed the microscope to me. I looked through the eyepiece eagerly, only to be disappointed. Dang it, he was right. "Slide 3. I held out my hand without looking at him. He handed it to me. It seemed like he was being careful not to touch my skin again. I took the most fleeting look I could manage. Interphase. I passed him the microscope before he could ask for it. He took a swift peek, and then wrote it down. I would have written it while he looked, but his clear, elegant script intimidated me. I didn't want to spoil the page with my clumsy scrawl. We were finished before anyone else was close. The others in the classroom were obviously struggling with the assignment, and I snickered when I saw Jessica trying to copy off of Eric's paper. It seemed like something she would do. Which left me with nothing to do but try to not look at him unsuccessfully. I glanced up, and he was staring at me, that same inexplicable look of frustration in his eyes. I looked down. His hands were clenched into hard fists again. Mr. Banner came to our table then, to see why we weren't working. He looked over our shoulders to glance at the completed lab, and then stared more intently to check the answers. "So, Edward, didn't you think Isabella should get a chance with the microscope?" Mr. Banner asked. "Bella," Edward corrected automatically. Actually, she identified 3 of the 5. Mr. Banner looked at me now. His expression was skeptical. "Have you done this lab before?" he asked. I smiled sheepishly. "Not with onion root. Whitefish blastula." "Yeah." Mr. Banner nodded. "Were you in an advanced placement program in New York?" "Yes, at a private school." "Sorry, I always go a bit ahead." I shot him an apologetic glance. "Well," he said after a moment, "I guess it's good you two are lab partners." He turned and walked away mumbling, "So the other kids can get a chance to learn something for themselves," under his breath. I scowled at his back and continued on with drawing loops on my notepad. "So are you enjoying the snow?" Edward broke the easy silence with small talk. "I always enjoy the snow, but it is the rain that bugs me. I have a feeling that I am going to be seeing it a lot more," I groaned quietly. "Why did you move here then?" His tone was partially accusatory. "It's complicated. I think I can keep up," he pressed. I had no idea what to say. Nobody has asked me this one question before, and I didn't want to lie to this godlike boy. He seemed surprisingly really interested in hearing what I was saying. I paused for a long moment, and then made the mistake of meeting his gaze. His dark gold eyes confused me, and I answered without thinking. My father thought that New York was too dangerous for me, so he sent me here with my aunt and uncle to keep me safe. I cursed myself mentally. I can't believe I spilled even that much. That doesn't sound so complex, he disagreed, but he was suddenly sympathetic. I couldn't fathom his interest, but he continued to stare at me with penetrating eyes, as if my dull life story was somehow vitally important. But you don't like it here, he commented. Does it matter what I think? My parents just want me safe. I will see them soon enough. I have also made a few friends, which is a feat for me, so I don't mind, I commented dryly. So that's all, I insisted, wondering why he was still staring at me that way. His gaze became appraising. I can tell that you don't like it here, he commented after another minute of silence. You wish you were home with your parents. He didn't ask this. I don't see how that is your business, I told him, icily. Am I wrong? I tried to ignore him. I didn't think so, he murmured smugly. Why does it matter to you? I asked, irritated. I kept my eyes away, watching the teacher make his rounds. That's a very good question, he muttered, so quietly that I wondered if he was talking to himself. However, after a few seconds of silence, I decided that was the only answer I was going to get. I sighed, scowling at the blackboard. Am I annoying you? He asked. He sounded amused. I glanced at him without thinking and told the truth again. Not exactly. I'm more annoyed at myself. My face is so easy to read. My mother always calls me her open book. I frowned. On the contrary, I find you very difficult to read. Despite everything that I'd said and he'd guessed, he sounded like he meant it. You must be a good reader then, I replied. Usually. He smiled widely, flashing a set of perfect, ultra-white teeth. Mr. Banner called the class to order then, and I turned with relief to listen. I was in disbelief that I just explained my dreary life to this bizarre, beautiful boy who may or may not despise me. He'd seemed engrossed in our conversation, but now I could see, from the corner of my eye, that he was leaning away from me again, his hands gripping the edge of the table with unmistakable tension. I tried to appear attentive as Mr. Banner illustrated, with transparencies on the overhead projector, what I had seen without difficulty through the microscope. But my thoughts were unmanageable. When the bell finally rang, Edward rushed as swiftly and as gracefully from the room as he had last Monday, and, like last Monday, I stared after him in amazement. I made my way to gym class and it was basically a blur until I got to the parking lot and Alice came running up to me with a big smile on her elfin face. Hey Bella, she greeted cheerfully. Hey Alice, what up? I asked as I put my book bag in the car and turned to face Alice. I was wondering if you would like to come over to our house tomorrow. We could do makeovers, her eager voice rung out over the parking lot. Yeah sure, I agreed. Alright, I will see you tomorrow Bella. I waved goodbye to the rest of the Cullens as they all saw me and Alice talking. They all waved back and smiled. I got in my car and drove home. When I woke up the next morning I knew something was different. I got up to look out the window and smiled. A fine layer of snow covered the yard, dusted the top of my truck, and whitened the road. All the rain from yesterday had frozen solid, coating the needles on the trees in fantastic, gorgeous patterns, and making the driveway a deadly ice slick. I had enough trouble not falling down when the ground was dry. It might be safer for me to go back to bed now. There was always one main reason why I loved the snow. That main reason would be my parents. Whenever it would snow, Dad and Mom would dress me so I was bundled up in large coat, hat, gloves, and a thick scarf. Then we would go down to Central Park and play in the snow. We would make snow angels and build snowmen. Mom and I would always name them too, no matter how small it was because of lack of snow. It snowed a good part of the time in New York, and I think that over the years it has been worsening my balance instead of improving. Being in a town with only rain and small amounts of snow is certainly helping my coordination. I knew that I had to dress warmer today, so I made sure that I had a matching scarf, hat, and coat to go with my dress. N. Profile. I didn't have much of a choice when I had to pick my shoes because Mom had only sent me one pair of shoes that matched this dress. I figured I might as well risk it and push my luck as I slipped on the heeled shoes. I fixed my hair up in a small bun on the side of head, finished getting ready, and then headed out for school. It took every ounce of my concentration to make it down the icy brick driveway alive. I was a frantic mess by the time that I actually got to my car, but I soothed knowing that I was inside it now, as I turned the heaters up. My car seemed to have no problem with the black ice that covered the roads. I drove very slowly, though, not wanting to carve a path of destruction through Main Street. When I got to the school, I looked around for Alice, surprised that I hadn't seen her yet. She was always the first one to approach me, mostly because she had so much energy that the others couldn't keep up with her. I was lost in my own thoughts, standing beside my car as I watched the Cullen car pull in, 2 cars down, when I heard an odd sound. It was a high-pitched screech, and it was fast becoming painfully loud. I looked up, startled. I saw several things simultaneously. Nothing was moving in slow motion, the way it does in the movies. Instead, the adrenaline rush seemed to make my brain work much faster, and I was able to absorb in clear detail several things at once. I glanced up from the Volvo and eyed the large van that was shooting its way towards me. I cringed as I realized that this could be the end of my life. It wasn't how I expected to die, honestly. I thought that I would die years from now trying to protect Mom and Dad from someone or something bad, but dying from a van because of an accident seemed unfair. Just before I heard the shattering crunch of the van folding around my car, something hit me, hard, but not from the direction I was expecting. My head cracked against the icy blacktop, and I felt something solid and cold pinning me to the ground. I was lying on the pavement behind the tan car I'd parked next to. But I didn't have a chance to notice anything else, because the van was still coming. It had curled gratingly around the end of the truck and, still spinning and sliding, was about to collide with me again. I looked up startled when I realized that I had not died, and that someone had actually saved me, doing the impossible. Edward was holding me protectively against his body and balancing the van in his hand and pushing against it at the same time. Only the supernatural could do that. I was fascinated, thinking that the Parkers were not the only supernatural beings out in the world, and wanted to learn more. Of course, my thoughts were cut short by a groan coming from Edward. I looked up at him and I could tell that he was struggling with holding onto me and the van at the same time. I tried to get out of his arms so that he could deal with it, but when I tried, he held on tighter. With a loud crash, he dropped the van, the glass shattering everywhere. It was absolutely silent for one long second before the screaming began. In the abrupt bedlam, I could hear more than one person shouting my name. But more clearly than all the yelling, I could hear Edward Cullen's low, frantic voice in my ear. "Bella, are you all right?" "I'm fine." My voice sounded strange. I tried to sit up again, but he held on tight. "You should be careful, you had hit your head pretty hard." I became aware of a throbbing ache centered above my left ear. "Ow," I said, surprised. That's what I thought. His voice, amazingly, sounded like he was suppressing laughter. "How in the—" I trailed off, trying to clear my head, get my bearings. "How did you get over here so fast?" "I was standing right next to you, Bella," he said, his tone serious again. I turned to sit up, and this time he let me, releasing his hold around my waist and sliding as far from me as he could in the limited space. I looked at his concerned, innocent expression and was disoriented again by the force of his gold-colored eyes. What was I asking him? The Cullens crowded around us then with worried and horrified expressions covering their faces, and they looked like they were studying my expression and reaction. "Bella, are you all right?" Alice was the one that seemed to get over her surveying expression first, and automatically turned to worry for me. "I'm fine," I shrugged. I felt fine. Besides the small ache on my head, I was okay. "Don't move," Rosalie instructed. "Get Tyler out of the van," someone shouted. There was a flurry of activity around us. I tried to get up, but Edward's cold hand pushed my shoulder down. "Just stay put for now." "But it's cold," I complained. It surprised me when he chuckled under his breath. There was an edge to the sound. "You were over there," I suddenly remembered, and his chuckle stopped short. "You were in your car." His expression turned hard. "No, I wasn't. I saw you." All around us was chaos. I could hear the gruffer voices of adults arriving on the scene. But I obstinately held on to our argument. I was right, and he was going to admit it. "Bella, I was standing with you, and I pulled you out of the way." He unleashed the full, devastating power of his eyes on me, as if trying to communicate something crucial. "No," I set my jaw. The gold in his eyes blazed. "Please, Bella." "Why?" I demanded. "Trust me," he pleaded, his soft voice overwhelming. I could hear the sirens now. "Will you promise to explain everything to me later?" "Fine," he snapped, abruptly exasperated. It only took 3 people to move the van. I was guessing that Emmett had helped the most because his face didn't look stressed in the least, while Coach Clapp and Mike Newton's faces both were turning purple for exhaustion. I almost died of humiliation when they put on the neck brace. It looked like the entire school was there, watching soberly as they loaded me in the back of the ambulance. Edward got to ride in the front. It was maddening. To think that I had actually made him homemade soup, and he pulls out the traitor card on me. When they'd lifted me away from the car, I had seen the deep dent in the tan car's bumper. A very distinct dent that fit the contours of Edward's shoulders as if he had braced himself against the car with enough force to damage the metal frame. I tried to think of a logical solution that could explain what I had just seen. I knew that there were mythical creatures in the world, but I didn't think that I would be friends with them. I chuckled to myself darkly, only I would have supernatural friends in a world full of humans. Naturally, the ambulance got a police escort to the county hospital. I felt ridiculous the whole time they were unloading me. What made it worse was that Edward simply glided through the hospital doors under his own power. I ground my teeth together to keep from yelling at him. How dare he? They put me in the emergency room, a long room with a line of beds separated by pastel-patterned curtains. A nurse put a pressure cuff on my arm and a thermometer under my tongue. Since no one bothered pulling the curtain around to give me some privacy, I decided I wasn't obligated to wear the stupid-looking neck brace anymore. There was another flurry of hospital personnel, another stretcher brought to the bed next to me. I recognized Tyler Crowley from my government class beneath the blood-stained bandages wrapped tightly around his head. Tyler looked 100 times worse than I felt, but he was staring anxiously at me. Bella, I'm so sorry. I'm fine. Tyler, you look awful. Are you all right? As we spoke, nurses began unwinding his soiled bandages, exposing a myriad of shallow slices all over his forehead and left cheek. He ignored me. I thought I was going to kill you. I was going too fast, and I hit the ice wrong. He winced as one nurse started dabbing at his face. Don't worry about it. You missed me. How did you get out of the way so fast? You were there, and then you were gone. Oh, Edward pulled me out of the way. I explained to him. This was always where my lying came in best. I was normally such a horrible liar, but when it came to my family and certain secrets, I could lie like nobody has seen me before. He looked confused. Who? Edward Cullen. He was standing next to me. My voice was fierce. This part always came easy to me, as being the most presentable witness to the crime. If the police would look into it more, they would find that I was witness to a lot of crimes. Cullen? I didn't see him. Wow, it was all so fast, I guess. Is he okay? I think so. He's here somewhere, but they didn't make him use a stretcher. They wheeled me away then, to x-ray my head. I told them there was nothing wrong, and I was right. Not even a concussion. To make matters worse, Uncle Ben and Aunt May arrived in my room before I even got to be let out. Oh Bella, we were so worried, Aunt May cried, while pulling her arms around my neck in a fierce hug. I am fine, Aunt May, Uncle Ben, I told them with a sigh. There is nothing wrong with me. I was pulled out of the way by Edward. You can breathe, I told them, trying to lighten the situation. They both visibly relaxed. After about 5 minutes of reassurances from me, they finally left. May went back home, and Ben went back to work. I asked if I could leave, but the nurse said I had to talk to a doctor first. So I was trapped in the ER. I was too annoyed by Tyler's apologies, so I tried to pretend to sleep. Is she sleeping? A musical voice asked. My eyes flew open. Edward was standing at the foot of my bed, smirking. I glared at him. It wasn't easy. It would have been more natural to ogle. Hey, Edward, I'm really sorry, Tyler began. Edward lifted a hand to stop him. No blood, no foul, he said, flashing his brilliant teeth. He moved to sit on the edge of Tyler's bed, facing me. He smirked again. So, what's the verdict? He asked me. There's nothing wrong with me at all, but they won't let me go, I complained. How come you aren't strapped to a gurney like the rest of us? It's all about who you know, he answered, but don't worry, I came to spring you. Then a doctor walked around the corner, and my mouth fell open. Were all of these people beautiful? He was young, he was blonde, and he was handsomer than any movie star I'd ever seen. He was pale, though, and tired-looking, with circles under his eyes. I had heard that was beautiful from Jessica's short description a long time ago, but wow. I can't believe that I hadn't figured out that they were some sort of supernatural in the first place. "So, Miss Parker," Dr. Cullen said in a remarkably appealing voice, "how are you feeling?" "I'm fine," I said, for the last time, I hoped. He walked to the light board on the wall over my head, and turned it on. "Your X-rays look good," he said. "Does your head hurt?" "Edward Said, you hit it pretty hard," he fretted. "It's fine," I repeated with a sigh, throwing a quick scowl toward Edward. The doctor's cool fingers probed lightly along my skull. He noticed when I winced. "Tender?" he asked. "Not really, I'd had worse." I heard a chuckle, and looked over to see Edward's patronizing smile. My eyes narrowed. "You can go home with him now. But come back if you feel dizzy or have trouble with your eyesight at all." "Can't I go back to school?" I asked, wanting to forget that this happened, and finish school for the day. "Maybe you should take it easy today." "I am fine though, and I was going over to Alice's after school," I whined. Then I remembered that he was Alice's father. "Also, if you notice something wrong with me, then you can just call an ambulance since she is your daughter," I smiled smugly. "Actually, Alice and Rosalie are both here. Edward, why don't you go get them?" Dr. Cullen suggested. Alice and Rosalie came in moments later while Dr. Cullen was looking over Tyler. "Oh Bella." Alice's voice was panicked as she threw her arms around me. "Don't scare me like that again," she cried into my dress. "Glad you're okay, Bella," Rosalie told me sincerely as she gave me a small hug. "Also, I love your dress today," she complimented. "I dressed warmer today for the weather," I told them as Alice let go of me and appraised my outfit. "Yes, I do say, Bella, we are going to have so much fun today with the day off," she cheered, as I giggled. "Be careful, girls," Dr. Cullen admonished as they pulled me out of the bed and through the door. "We have so much to do," Alice trilled in her bell-like voice. We spent the next 9 hours trying on different outfits and doing makeovers. Overall, it was a fun day. I never did see Edward for the rest of the day though. I did get to meet Mrs. Cullen, and it was obvious of how Dr. Cullen fell in love with her. The woman radiates love through every fiber of her being. She even told me to call her Esme, which I now call her. I left the house around 4 o'clock with Alice as she drove me to the school so I could get my car. I could tell that they were still a bit wary of what I had seen earlier, but I didn't let it affect my mood. I was too happy spending time with Alice and Rosalie. Sadly, when I got home, it was impossible to keep such a thing from my parents, so they knew what happened, other than the supernatural phenomenon that had happened earlier, and replacing it with, "He was right next to me." They bought it easily. Mom was frantic, and I could practically hear Dad pacing the floor. They finally calmed down after about 2 hours, after I finally sent them a picture of myself from the day, and they sighed in relief once it was picked up from their cell phone. I don't know if it was my new senses were starting to kick in or if I was always aware of Edward's presence, but that night I knew that he was watching me sleep, and the fact that my mind kept pace and allowing me to see his face at night was intriguing. My dreams about Edward that night were different from any other dream that I have ever had. I knew that Edward and his family were different, heck, maybe not even human. The way that Edward had gazed at me yesterday followed me through my dreams and made an appearance that would be known as scary or startling, but Edward made me feel special. When you look into the sky at night you see stars and moon, but when it's cloudy you can't see the stars or the moon. There are always troubles in life, but sometimes they just need to be overcome by building your way to make it to the point in which life has exceeded its limits and things need to be told. So the moon works to help make the clouds disappear, at least in my mind, that's how I see it. So when I woke up the next morning I decided that I would wait for Edward to tell me the truth. I wouldn't pry. I would leave their family secret, a secret, and be kind. They were after all my only friends and wonderful people, no matter if they are humans or not, my friends.
I quickly did my morning routine and dressed in my red dress. A.N. Check profile please. It wasn't as cold out as yesterday, so I deemed it suitable.
I hugged my aunt and uncle a quick goodbye before heading out the door for the day. Alice bounced excitedly over towards me when I parked next to her. "So Bella, how was your night?" She questioned me but still glanced subtly over towards her brother who was making his way towards the entrance of the school. "My night was fine. What about you? What did you do?" This started her energy all over again as she bounced and pulled me over towards her car and pulled out a cute pair of strap heels. The one thing that seemed to be improving was surely my balance. Rosalie joined into our chat too, and we all parted ways when the first bell rang. My first classes passed by quickly, with me in a good mood. When lunch rolled around I was slightly nervous and jittery, thinking about how Edward would act. Would he ignore me? Like this morning. Would he try to forget what happened? I guess we would see when I arrive. I pushed the door open to the cafeteria to find all the Cullens present and seated with food. Hey guys, I greeted as I sat down and pulled out my lunch bag. Hey Belle, what's up? Emmett seemed eager for my answer, for whatever reason I couldn't fathom. Not much, Emmett. You? I re-questioned as I looked at his large smiling face. We were just planning a trip to a water park. Are you in? The smile on his dimpled face was almost blinding as he showed all of his teeth. I looked around and noticed out of the corner of my eye, which Edward was scowling down at his food. I didn't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a burden, I spoke my thoughts. A burden, please Bella, we hadn't had this much fun in years, Rosalie scoffed, and I believed her, so of course my answer was. I'd love to, but only if it's okay with your parents, I told them, worried about what Carlisle and Esme would say about a trip like this. Actually they are coming. They thought that it would be fun to go on a trip like this, Jasper said with a smile. I was guessing that they hadn't spent much family time together recently. We talked about going to Ocean Shores, a quiet beach that would be a little drive but worth it. Emmett also talked about the water park that they have there. Lunch passed quickly and I soon found myself walking towards biology with Edward by my side. I hummed Claire de Lune under my breath as I made my way to my desk and pulled out my notebook. Edward ignored me all class long. When the teacher told us to work together, he just pretended that I wasn't there. How rude. Edward sped out of the classroom when the bell rang. I was surprised when he pushed the door open instead of going right through it at his pace. The day finished quickly and I soon found myself at my aunt and uncle's home with Alice, Rosalie, Jasper, Emmett, and a reluctant Edward right behind me. The reactions to the room where my father lived in and where I currently live in were different. Bella, where are your girl things? Rosalie teased, looking around the boyish room. We could do so many different things in here, Alice suggested in a thoughtful tone once the look of horror washed off of her face. Your video games are outdated, Emmett pouted when he saw the 20-year-old computer games. This is my father's old room. Nobody has been here for around 20 years, I laughed at their expressions. Then why haven't you done anything yet? Alice seemed curious as to why I would leave it this way. I don't know how long I will be here. I didn't want to make a mess of it, I explained with a shrug. What, you aren't staying? Emmett pouted. I am staying now, I just don't know how long I will be here. It's a typical roll the dice scenario and see where it lands, I said sadly, to my only friends. I grabbed my bathing suit and told May and Ben what we were doing and left. We all took my car because it had the most seats. Bella, since we are taking your car, can I drive? Sure, Rosalie, I told her as I handed her the small set of keys while she squealed loudly. I ended up sitting right next to a stiff Edward in the car as Rosalie and Emmett sat up in front and Jasper and Alice sat behind us in the very back of the car. Emmett got bored 5 minutes into the trip and started looking through my set of CDs. Bella, you have amazing music, he turned to me, and some real crap too, he motioned towards my set of piano composers. Those are excellent composers, you know nothing, I scoffed at him. He put in Debussy and then took it right back out. You know what, this isn't even worth my time, I laughed at his facial expression. It was a mix between horror and disgust, over a CD. Emmett, you're overthinking this. Why don't you put in something you actually like instead of dwelling on the negatives, I offered. At this everyone seemed to burst out into laughter at this. What's so funny? It seemed like I missed a big joke, and Emmett looked confused also. Emmett, overthink. Alice gasped out between her laughter. I giggled as Emmett ignored them and put in the Beatles. I sung along when Emmett started singing to Penny Lane, and everyone slowly started to sing along too, except Edward. Edward, get that stick out of your butt, and don't act so hateful. You're killing the mood, buddy, I told him what I was thinking in the middle of the song. He just turned away from me as I muttered, rude, under my breath. Emmett and Jasper couldn't hold in their own giggles at that, they sounded like girls. Rosalie, Alice, and I all laughed at them. The rest of the ride was the same. Emmett kept changing out the CD every couple of songs. We all sung along happily, except for Edward, who was rigid as ever in his seat. We finally pulled up to the water park, and it was huge. There were slides and a large pool. It was every kid's dream come true. Everyone quickly piled out of the car and went to the change room. I didn't see Carlisle's car yet, but I figured he would see our car, so I followed after them. I quickly slipped into my yellow zigzag printed swimsuit. A.N. Check profile. All of them are there. Rosalie and Alice both waited for me to finish getting ready. When I made my appearance over to them, their jaws dropped. Bella, you look amazing, Rosalie gasped out. Rose, you look pretty remarkable yourself, I told her blushing. I wasn't good with comments like these. Alice, you look outstanding yourself. I smiled at my friends. Thanks, they squealed. They gave me a quick hug, and we went out to the pool. I set my towel and cell phone down next to the pool. In case Mom or Dad called, I wouldn't want to worry them if I didn't answer my phone, so I kept it close. I was glad that it was an indoor pool. I think that I would have frozen if I were to go in the outside water. The boys were already in the pool, and stopped completely when we walked out of the locker room. Their eyes were wide, and mouths agape, staring uncontrollably. We all walked over to them and jumped in. We all laughed as we came up for air. Soon Carlisle and Esme came over to us, and jumped into the water like us girls did. Overall, it was a great time. I did find one rather large issue though. Edward. He wore regular swim trunks, but it showed off his amazing body. He looked like a god, and when we stood next to each other I could tell that I was just plain and ordinary. I heard my cell phone ringing next to the pool with my towel. The sounds of Claire de Lune rang through the air, and I waded over towards the edge of the pool. Hello, I asked as I answered. Bella, darling, where are you? I hear splashing sounds in the background, Dad asked curiously. I am at a water park. I was going to call you later, I hesitated. He always liked to know where I am. It's fine, dear. Don't let me interrupt your fun, he sighed. Something was bothering him. Dad, what's wrong? I was worried, as I sat down on the edge of the pool, dangling my feet and looking at my own worried expression in the water. No, nothing is wrong. I just thought that I would let you know that we caught a break in our situation, he finished. You sound like a police officer, I giggled. Well, I am not a police officer, I am just doing what I think is right. His laughter died down as mine did also. All right, so what is this break that you caught? I questioned curiously. I think that we may have found one of the people that are behind this little mission, Dad told me conspiratorially. Well then. That is good news. What is your plan of action? I hope he doesn't get hurt. I don't know any details yet. I just thought that you would like to know so you don't worry as much about exposure, Dad sighed regretfully. He didn't like this, neither did I missed him and Mom too much. I looked around to make sure nobody was in range, but I had a feeling that the Cullens were listening in on this conversation. Even though they were across to the other side of the pool. It was their movements that gave it away, like they were faking the games they were playing. I must be paranoid, I shook my head as to clear the overwhelming suspicions I was feeling. They had their secret, and I had mine. If we do get exposed though, you know we can just move, and change our identities. I can dye my hair purple, I laughed. He laughed with me, but I could tell he was still stressed. Dad, you need to relax, you are almost paranoid. Have you done anything that doesn't involve this case, since I left? Yes, he hesitated. He was lying. I got my lying skills from him, not hard to tell. You are lying, I sang to him. Fine. I will take your mother out and we will go see the symphony, tonight, he agreed. I could hear the smile in his voice as he spoke of her, making me smile too. Excellent. Now you go out tonight and have some fun. Don't let work take over everything. Enjoyment isn't a word you use too often, so use it. Now, where is Mom? I was surprised that I haven't heard her speak yet. I do have enjoyment in my life. You and Mary Jane are my biggest enjoyments. Also, she is in the shower, he told me. She is going to be furious that she didn't hear this conversation. This is a scandal, did you know that? I laughed and he joined me. Yes, but you can just tell her that when she calls later that I had a surprise for her so it had to be secret, promise? Promise. You should tell her soon though, she would certainly enjoy this, I smiled. All right, I am going to get going now. You have fun also, I love you. Love you too, Dad. Remember what I told you. I raised my eyebrows although I knew he couldn't see it. Bye darling, he hung up, and I did the same. I sighed as I put my phone back on my towel and went back in the pool. Sorry about that, I said once I got back over towards the Cullen area. I noticed idly that the other attendees of the pool are now all gone, interesting. They all had looks of confusion, and it looked like they were appraising me, it was odd. What? I asked after an awkward moment of silence. Nothing, they all said at the same time. I must have been a bright pink in the face by this point. We played in the water for several more hours, all laughing and having a great time. At around 6 o'clock we all headed out. Carlisle and Esme drove the same car they came in, and somehow Edward and I ended up in the same spots as last time. Although this time Alice drove, with Rosalie in the passenger seat, Emmett and Jasper sat in the back seat, poking fun at Edward and I the entire ride. Geez. You two are practically attached at the hip. Looks like the lovebirds are pretty damn cozy. Can't seem to stay away, huh? I turned around in my seat and glared at Emmett's big grin. Should I even bother to defend myself? I asked to no one in particular, and then sighed. They will leave you alone if they don't get a response, Edward whispered to me. Progress. This was the first time Edward has talked to me since the accident. I had a feeling that was the case. I murmured back with a frown. Rose, can you turn on the radio or something? I almost begged. What, you're done talking to your lover? She giggled. The rest of the car laughed as I was now a bright shade of pink, but Edward let out a low annoyed growl. I was even more embarrassed because now I was slightly turned on. Jasper seemed to laugh even harder. Yes, this was definitely the worst car ride I have ever experienced. When we had finally pulled up to Aunt May and Uncle Ben's house, I was sad, but extremely relieved. I was sad because I was going to be away from Edward, and I was already whining in my head about how much I was going to miss him, but then I called myself a baby and mentally slapped myself. I was also relieved because I could be away from the group's cruel taunts towards Edward and me. I couldn't have been happier to get out of the car and say goodbye to everyone as they pulled away in their own car. Aunt May, and Uncle Ben, and me all ate a quick dinner before I headed off to bed. That night again, I knew that Edward was watching me. I could sense his presence again, all through the night. I noticed idly that when I woke up, it was around 5 a.m., and I wasn't really tired anymore. My sleeping habits seemed to be dwindling, less and less. I usually got up at 6 with a bad attitude. Since I had so much extra time, I hurried downstairs in my pajamas and started making breakfast for everyone. I swiftly cooked up several pancakes for each of us, and set the table. I poured some orange juice and milk for us, and put some blueberries on the side of each plate. Aunt May and Uncle Ben came down a few minutes later, obviously smelling my cooking. Bella dear, that smells delicious, May told me with a wide smile as she took in the finished breakfast setting. Thanks, I smiled back. You are too kind, Ben told me as he kissed my forehead, then made a beeline for his table setting. No problem, I smiled, pleased. We ate breakfast slowly, and made small talk for a while before we lapsed into silence. When I finished eating, May told me to get ready for school because since I made breakfast I shouldn't have to clean up. I noticed belatedly that she was using my own words back at me when I told her that I should clean up since she cooks every day. I wore an older dress today, more 1950s. It was a navy blue halterneck with gold stars and dots dress. This had to have been one of my favorites. I made it to school just a few minutes before the bell rang. The group was standing by their car waiting for me. They waved as I pulled in next to them. I gave a similar smile and wave back as I parked my car. I didn't even have a chance to turn the engine off before the door was wrenched open by a very hyper pixie-like girl. Hey Alice, I greeted her. I grabbed my purse and school bag as I exited the car and smiled slightly at her eagerness as she scooped me up into a very tight hug. Morning Bella, she sung. We talked for a few minutes before the bell rang, and we all headed for class after a few morning hugs from the girls. The day went by relatively quickly and I soon found myself at our standard lunch table. This was a pattern that I was used to. On the weekend we finally went to the club that Alice deemed off the hook, her words, not mine. I had danced with all of even Edward for a little bit. He had smiled politely at me, but I could still see a war waging on in his head. He seemed at a loss as to what to do, about what, I wasn't sure. The same things happened in a habitual pattern for the next 2 months. I was always sad when Edward refused to even look in my direction, but when I looked into his eyes I could still see the constant pain. I never understood what had put him in pain, and because he never talked to me, I never had a chance to comprehend what goes on inside his beautiful head. Today I was surprised to see Mike as he approached me as I was about to head to biology class. I threw my lunch away and looked at him curiously as he deliberately approached me. Hey Bella, want to walk to class together? Sure. It came out more as a question on my part. What did he want? Great, he cheered, seeming pleased with himself. Mike perched himself on Edward's and mine's desk, further confusing me. I could feel the buzz of electricity, alerting me to Edward's arrival. I heard his chair scrape quietly on the cheap flooring, and I did my best to ignore him, like usual. "So," Mike said, looking at the floor, "Jessica asked me to the spring dance." "That's great." I made my voice bright and enthusiastic. "You'll have a lot of fun with Jessica." "Well," he floundered as he examined my smile, clearly not happy with my response. "I told her I had to think about it." "Why would you do that?" I let disapproval color my tone. Though I was relieved he hadn't given her an absolute no, I had a bad feeling about where this was going. "Mike, I think you should tell her yes," I said. "Did you already ask someone?" Did Edward notice how Mike's eyes flickered in his direction? "No," I assured him. "I'm not going to the dance at all." "Why not?" Mike demanded. I didn't want to go with him even if I lost a bet or was paid a high amount of money. It wasn't worth it. He had a small mind if he hadn't realized yet that I had not given him a second glance. Either that or he was just incredibly dense to Jessica and my own feelings. She liked him, I despised him. He freaked me out. "I'm going to Seattle that Saturday," I explained. I needed to get out of town anyway. It was suddenly the perfect time to go. "Can't you go some other weekend?" "Sorry, no," I said. "So you shouldn't make Jessica wait any longer, it's rude." "Yeah, you're right," he mumbled, and turned, dejected, to walk back to his seat. I closed my eyes and pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to push the guilt and sympathy out of my head. Mr. Banner began talking. I sighed and opened my eyes. And Edward was staring at me curiously, that same, familiar edge of frustration even more distinct now in his black eyes. I stared back, surprised, expecting him to look quickly away, but instead he continued to gaze with probing intensity into my eyes. There was no question of me looking away. My hands started to shake. "Mr. Cullen?" the teacher called, seeking the answer to a question that I hadn't heard. "The Krebs cycle," Edward answered, seeming reluctant as he turned to look at Mr. Banner. I looked down at my book as soon as his eyes released me, trying to find my place. Cowardly as ever, I shifted my hair over my right shoulder to hide my face. I couldn't believe the rush of emotion pulsing through me. Just because he'd happened to look at me with his strange gaze. I couldn't allow him to have this level of influence over me. It was pathetic. More than pathetic, it was unhealthy. I tried very hard not to be aware of him for the rest of the hour, and, since that was impossible, at least not to let him know that I was aware of him. When the bell rang at last, I turned my back to him to gather my things, expecting him to leave immediately as usual. "Bella?" His voice shouldn't have been so familiar to me, as if I'd known the sound of it all my life rather than for just 2 months. I turned slowly, unwillingly. I didn't want to feel what I knew I would feel when I looked at his too perfect face. My expression was wary when I finally turned to him. His expression was unreadable. He didn't say anything. "What? Are you speaking to me again?" I finally asked, an unintentional note of petulance in my voice. His lips twitched, fighting a smile. "No, not really," he admitted. I closed my eyes and inhaled slowly through my nose, aware that I was gritting my teeth. He waited. "Then what do you want, Edward?" I asked, keeping my eyes closed. It was easier to talk to him coherently that way. "I'm sorry." He sounded sincere. "I'm being very rude, I know. But it's better this way, really." I opened my eyes. His face was very serious. "I don't know what you mean," I said, my voice guarded. "It's better if we're not friends," he explained. "Trust me." "Fine, be that way," I amended. I didn't want to trust him. He had lied to me before, and now I wasn't going to be the weak one here. I turned my head sharply away from him, clenching my jaw against all the wild accusations I wanted to hurl at him. I gathered my books together, then stood and walked to the door. I meant to sweep dramatically out of the room, but of course I caught the toe of my heel on the door jamb and dropped my books. I stood there for a moment, thinking about leaving them. Then I sighed and bent to pick them up. He was there. He'd already stacked them into a pile. He handed them to me, his face hard. "Thank you," I said frostily. His eyes narrowed. "You're welcome," he retorted. I straightened up swiftly, turned away from him again, and stalked off to gym without looking back. Gym was brutal. We'd moved on to basketball. My team never passed me the ball, but that was good since I was still gaining my equilibrium, and seemed to walk best in heels, thanks to Mom. Today I was worse than usual because my head was so filled with Edward. I tried to concentrate on my feet, but he kept creeping back into my thoughts just when I really needed my balance. It was a relief, as always, to leave. I almost ran to the car. I preferred sticking to my small group of friends. I didn't want to be around Jessica or her group of followers at all. My car had suffered only minimal damage in the accident. I'd had to replace the taillights, and I touched up the paint job after Dad's long speech of nice cars and his insistence with using the credit card he gave me before I left. Tyler's parents had to sell their van for parts. I almost had a stroke when I rounded the corner and saw a tall, dark figure leaning against the side of my car. Then I realized it was just Eric. I started walking again. "Hey, Eric," I called. "Hi, Bella. What's up?" I said as I pressed the unlock button for the door. I wasn't paying attention to the uncomfortable edge in his voice, so his next words took me by surprise. I was just wondering if you would go to the spring dance with me?" His voice broke on the last word. "I thought it was girl's choice," I said, too startled to be diplomatic. "Well, yeah," he admitted, shamefaced. I recovered my composure and tried to make my smile warm. "Thank you for asking me, but I'm going to be in Seattle that day." "Oh," he said. "Well, maybe next time." "Sure," I agreed, and then bit my lip. I wouldn't want him to take that too literally. He slouched off, back toward the school. I heard a low chuckle. Edward was walking past the front of my car, looking straight forward, his lips pressed together. I yanked the door open and jumped inside, slamming it loudly behind me. I revved the engine, irritated, and reversed out into the aisle. Edward was in his car already, 2 spaces down, sliding out smoothly in front of me, cutting me off. He stopped there, to wait for his family. I could see the 4 of them walking this way, but still by the cafeteria. I considered taking out the rear of his shiny Volvo, but there were too many witnesses. Alice had told me that he considered his car the way a mother would take care of her child, and so there was a good chance that he would break down crying if it were ever hurt. I almost considered it again, but then sighed. I didn't want him mad at me. I looked in my rearview mirror. A line was beginning to form. Directly behind me, Tyler Crowley was in his recently acquired used Sentra, waving. I was too aggravated to acknowledge him. While I was sitting there, looking everywhere but at the car in front of me, I heard a knock on my passenger side window. I looked over. It was Tyler. I glanced back in my rearview mirror, confused. His car was still running and the door left open. I used the automatic controls and rolled down the passenger side window. "I'm sorry, Tyler, I am waiting for Edward." I was annoyed. Obviously the holdup wasn't my fault. "Oh, I know. I just wanted to ask you something while we're trapped here," he grinned. "This could not be happening. Will you ask me to the spring dance?" he continued. "I'm not going to be in town, Tyler." My voice sounded a little sharp. I had to remember it wasn't his fault that Mike and Eric had already used up my quota of patience for the day. "Yeah, Mike said that," he admitted. "Then why?" He shrugged. "I was hoping you were just letting him down easy." "Okay, it was completely his fault." "Sorry, Tyler," I said, working to hide my irritation. "I really am going out of town." "That's cool. We still have prom," and before I could respond, he was walking back to his car. I could feel the shock on my face. I looked forward to see Alice, Rosalie, Emmett, and Jasper all sliding into the Volvo, waving goodbye to me. In his rearview mirror, Edward's eyes were on me. He was unquestionably shaking with laughter, as if he'd heard every word Tyler had said. My foot itched toward the gas pedal. One little bump wouldn't hurt any of them, just that glossy silver paint job. I revved the engine. But they were all in, and Edward was speeding away. I drove home slowly, carefully, muttering to myself the whole way. When I got home, I decided to make chicken enchiladas for dinner. It was a long process, and it would keep me busy. While I was simmering the onions and peppers, my cell phone rang. I quickly sped over to my purse and pulled it out. The caller ID read, "Mom," so I was excited to see how their night had gone. "Hey Mom." I couldn't even seem to hide any of the excitement in my voice. "Bella," her voice was cheery and animated. "What's up?" I tried to act nonchalant. "Oh Bella, you are never going to believe what we did last night." Thankfully she was too excited to even notice my tone of voice. "What did you do?" "We went and saw Cinderella, and it was marvelous." I heard her sigh dreamily on the other end of the line. Oh, I probed for more information. It was a beautiful reenactment of the original movie, you know, the old 1965 version. I could hear the smile in her voice. You mean the one that we have to watch every other Sunday because of tradition? I laughed. Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella is always beautiful, and you know it. Leslie Ann Warren is my idol, and I love it, so don't judge so cruelly, she chuckled. I am just going to throw out that was over 50 years ago, and you weren't even born yet. Also, I do like it, it just gets old after a while. I smiled into the phone. You know that you would always get so excited about it, and watch it to see when they get married. She laughed heartily at this, while I turned pink in the cheeks. Even though they never did, you waited. She was full out laughing now. Alright, are you done reminiscing? I never wanted a call to end so quickly in my life. Alright, she kept chuckling. Well, I wanted to let you know that I enjoyed my evening very much and wanted to thank you, she giggled. How did you know? I chuckled along with her. I didn't at first, but then the thought came to me that your father has been very busy lately, and to even think that he took an hour off from working the streets is a surprise. So I just added you to the equation, and knowing that he would listen to you, I just knew, she told me insightfully. You just put those puzzle pieces together quickly, didn't you? I chuckled. It certainly wasn't a big puzzle, she laughed. Well, I have to go. Aunt May just got home, and I am making dinner tonight, I told her as I heard the front door open. Oh, you are just so sweet, she cooed. Bye, Mom, I laughed. Bye, dear, she chuckled. After I hung up with Mom, I tried to concentrate on dinner, dicing the chicken especially. I didn't want to take another trip to the emergency room. But my head was spinning, trying to analyze every word Edward had spoken today. What did he mean? It was better if we weren't friends. My stomach twisted as I realized what he must have meant. He must see how absorbed I was by him. He must not want to lead me on, so we couldn't even be friends because he wasn't interested in me at all. Of course he wasn't interested in me, I thought angrily, my eyes stinging, a delayed reaction to the onions. I wasn't interesting. And he was. Interesting and brilliant and mysterious and perfect and beautiful and possibly able to lift full-sized vans with one hand. Well, that was fine. I could leave him alone. I would leave him alone. May and Ben seemed to really enjoy the enchiladas that I made, or they were just really good actors. Halfway through dinner I decided that I would bring up my Seattle trip to them. Uncle Ben, Aunt May? I got their attention. Yeah, Bella? I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to Seattle for the day a week from Saturday, if that's okay. I didn't want to ask permission. It set a bad precedent, but I felt rude, so I tacked it on at the end. Why? They sounded surprised, as if you were unable to imagine something that Forks couldn't offer. Well, I wanted to get a few books. The library here is pretty limited, I told them. Yeah, sure, they smiled and continued to eat. The next morning, when I pulled into the parking lot, I deliberately parked as far as possible from the silver Volvo. I didn't want to put myself in the path of too much temptation and end up owing him a new car. I waved to the Cullens as soon as I got out of the car, though. They all waved pleasantly back at me, and it seemed as if I were missing a private joke. Getting out of my car, I fumbled with my key and it fell into a puddle at my feet. As I bent to get it, a white hand flashed out and grabbed it before I could. I jerked upright. Edward was right next to me, leaning casually against my truck. How do you do that? I asked in amazed irritation. Do what? He held my key out as he spoke. As I reached for it, he dropped it into my palm. Appear out of thin air. Bella, it's not my fault if you were exceptionally unobservant. His voice was quiet as usual, velvet, muted. I scowled at his perfect face. His eyes were light again today, a deep, golden honey color. Then I had to look down, to reassemble my now tangled thoughts. Why the traffic jam last night? I demanded, still looking away. I thought you were supposed to be pretending I don't exist, not irritating me to death. That was for Tyler's sake, not mine. I had to give him his chance, he snickered. You, I gasped. I couldn't think of a bad enough word. It felt like the heat of my anger should physically burn him, but he only seemed more amused. And I'm not pretending you don't exist, he continued. So you are trying to irritate me to death? Since Tyler's van didn't do the job? Anger flashed in his tawny eyes. His lips pressed into a hard line, all signs of humor gone. Bella, you are utterly absurd, he said, his low voice cold. My palms tingled. I wanted so badly to hit something. I was surprised at myself. I was usually a nonviolent person. I turned my back and started to walk away. Wait, he called. I kept walking, sloshing angrily through the rain, but he was next to me, easily keeping pace. I'm sorry, that was rude, he said as we walked. I ignored him. I'm not saying it isn't true, he continued, but it was rude to say it, anyway. Why won't you leave me alone? I grumbled. I wanted to ask you something, but you sidetracked me, he chuckled. He seemed to have recovered his good humor. Do you have a multiple personality disorder? I asked severely. You're doing it again. I sighed. Fine, then. What do you want to ask? I was wondering if, a week from Saturday, you know, the day of the spring dance. Are you trying to be funny? I interrupted him, wheeling toward him. My face got drenched as I looked up at his expression. His eyes were wickedly amused. Will you please allow me to finish? I bit my lip and clasped my hands together, interlocking my fingers, so I couldn't do anything rash. I heard you say you were going to Seattle that day, and I was wondering if you wanted a ride. That was unexpected. What? I wasn't sure what he was getting at. Do you want a ride to Seattle? With who? I asked, mystified. Myself, obviously. He enunciated every syllable, as if he were talking to someone mentally handicapped. I was still stunned. Why? Well, I was planning to go to Seattle in the next few weeks, and thought that carpooling would be the best idea. Save on gas, he explained. My gas is none of your concern. I started to walk again, but I was too surprised to maintain the same level of anger. But it could be fun, like a bonding experience. He matched my pace again. I thought you were ignoring me, stupid, shiny Volvo owner. If my family is going to talk to you, I might as well get to know you better too, he told me. Honestly, Edward. I felt a thrill go through me as I said his name, and I hated it. I can't keep up with you. I thought you didn't want to be my friend. I said it would be better if we weren't friends, not that I didn't want to be. Oh, thanks. Now that's all cleared up. I was sure he noted my heavy sarcasm. I realized I had stopped walking again. We were under the shelter of the cafeteria roof now, so I could more easily look at his face, which certainly didn't help my clarity of thought. It would be more prudent for you not to be my friend, he explained. But I'm tired of trying to stay away from you, Bella. His eyes were gloriously intense as he uttered that last sentence, his voice smoldering. I couldn't remember how to breathe. Will you go with me to Seattle? He asked, still intense. I couldn't speak yet, so I just nodded. He smiled briefly, and then his face became serious. You really should stay away from me, he warned. I'll see you in class. He turned abruptly and walked back the way we'd come. In class, Jessica approached me. Surprise would be the first emotion that I registered, and left me verbally handicapped. Hey, Bella, she greeted cheerfully. What do you want, Jessica? I was finally able to speak, and it came out more like a demand. Well, I was thinking that I was being so rude to you lately, and I wanted to apologize, she explained with another cheerful, but fake smile. I hadn't realized that you were being rude, I shrugged. Was ignoring me rude? If it was, I would hope that she would be rude more often. Well, anyways. I was wondering if you would like to come to the beach with us on Saturday. Her fake smile was back, and this time in full force. Sure. I wanted to smack myself for agreeing, but then thought better of it because I would look like a complete fool. I wondered what she wanted. Great. You can meet everyone at the La Push Beach at 9, she smiled and ran off, without giving me a chance to answer her. When I met everyone at lunch, they were already all seated. Hey, I smiled at them all, including Edward this time. Was it just me or were his eyes glowing? I just got invited to go to the beach on Saturday. You guys want to join? I hoped that they wanted to join me, and make this trip more bearable. What beach? Emmett asked this. La Push, I told him. Rosalie let out a low hiss, that I was surprised that even I heard it. Did she really just hiss? Who hisses? I eyed her warily. We are going camping this weekend actually, you could join us, Alice hopped into the conversation. I would, but I already got roped into other plans. I made a sound that was like a half-groaned, half-whine. They all chuckled at that. Have fun, Emmett laughed loudly and a few people close by scooted away from him. Fun, fun, I waved my hands offhandedly, they laughed harder. I was not looking forward for the day when I woke up the next morning, but I was pleased to see the sun out, but still too low in the sky, I sighed heavily as I went to go and take my usual morning shower. The hot water against my chilly morning skin felt magnificent, and was sad when I found the water going cold. I quickly grabbed my towel and wrapped it around my body as I made my way back to my bedroom to get dressed. I found a sequined sleeveless mini dress that was usually way too short for my taste, but I had my dark blue two-piece halter neck-piece bathing suit on underneath, so I deemed it okay for the day. I put my hair up into a loose bun and brushed my teeth. Pleased with myself, I packed my beach bag with 2 towels and a book. I hurriedly made myself a piece of toast and waving goodbye to Aunt May and Uncle Ben as I had told them last night about my plans for the day. I had never been to this beach before, but it was quite a sight to see. The water was dark gray, even in the sunlight, white-capped and heaving to the gray, rocky shore. Islands rose out of the steel harbor waters with sheer cliff sides, reaching to uneven summits, and crowned with austere, soaring firs. The beach had only a thin border of actual sand at the water's edge, after which it grew into millions of large, smooth stones that looked uniformly gray from a distance, but close up were every shade a stone could be. Terracotta, sea green, lavender, blue-gray, dull gold. The tide line was strewn with huge driftwood trees, bleached bone white in the salt waves, some piled together against the edge of the forest fringe, some lying solitary, just out of reach of the waves. There was a brisk wind coming off the waves, cool and briny. Pelicans floated on the swells while seagulls and a lone eagle wheeled above them. The clouds still circled the sky, threatening to invade at any moment, but for now the sun shone bravely in its halo of blue sky. Dad, Mom and I had always gone to oceans and lakes for different holidays or different occasions, so I knew how to do just about anything in the water. Surfing and snorkeling were 2 of my favorites, but swimming out really far is really fun too. I met everyone at some driftwood logs that had been set out parallel to each other. I took my seat next on one side and watched the small waves roll in. There was a fire circle already in place, filled with black ashes. Eric and the boy I thought was named Ben gathered broken branches of driftwood from the drier piles against the forest edge, and soon had a teepee-shaped construction built atop the old cinders. "Have you ever seen a driftwood fire?" Mike asked me. I was sitting on one of the bone-colored benches. The other girls clustered, gossiping excitedly, on either side of me. Mike kneeled by the fire, lighting one of the smaller sticks with a cigarette lighter. "Yes," I said as he placed the blazing twig carefully against the teepee. "You'll like this then. Watch the colors." He lit another small branch and laid it alongside the first. The flames started to lick quickly up the dry wood. "It's blue," I said in a bored tone. I had learned this trick when I was 5 years old. It had been exciting then, but now that I was 17, things have changed. "The salt does it. Pretty, isn't it?" He lit one more piece, placed it where the fire hadn't yet caught, and then came to sit by me. Thankfully, Jessica was on his other side. She turned to him and claimed his attention. I watched the strange blue and green flames crackle toward the sky. I got bored from just sitting there, so I went and laid down one of my towels so I could make a little area for myself. I next took off my dress and stripped down to just my bathing suit and went off towards the water. A little over an hour later, I went to shore for a break. I lay down comfortably on the towel that I had spread out next to the group and pulled out my book so I could catch up on some reading. I was about halfway through a page before I heard my name being called. "Bella." Jessica's nasally voice sounded way too loud, even at her regular tone. She should talk less, it could give people hearing issues. "Yes." I tried to keep the irritation out of my voice. "So are you like dating Edward?" "No, why? What was she getting at?" "No need to lie. We like totally saw you two talking for like ever." She flipped her hair. "About that Seattle trip, that he just like had to join you on." Her voice rained jealousy. "Were you eavesdropping?" My voice was incredulous. "Did she stoop that low?" "No, you were like right like there, and I overheard." She announced the last word like I was mentally challenged, further angering me. "First of all, I am not lying. Second, we are not dating. Third, this is none of your business." I told her angrily as I stood up and packed up my things. "I'll be leaving now." I glared at her. "I think that you are just angry that you are not dating." She laughed cruelly. "You're sick, Jessica. Get help." I looked at her incredulously. I slipped my dress back on and grabbed my bag. I headed towards my car in an angered flurry, and ignored the boys' arguments for me to come back to the group. Mike's was the loudest. "Please, Bella, It won't be the same without you, he persisted, but I ignored them all, completely annoyed. I was so angry that I wasn't watching where I was going and my sandal got caught on a small bush as I passed it and almost fell to the ground. Almost being the main word because someone had caught me. I looked up to see a Native American boy who looked about 16 years old at least. "You okay?" He looked at me anxiously. "I'm fine." I thought my balance issues were getting better. I chuckled awkwardly, because his arms were still around my waist, and wanted them off of me. "Well, my name is Jacob Black." He finally let go of me and held out his hand. "Bella Parker." I smiled politely. "Oh, you're Ben and May's niece," he smiled. "How did you know?" I looked at him suspiciously. "My father Billy works with your uncle, and Ben has apparently been talking about you since he first heard that you were coming to live with them," he chuckled. "Oh," I looked down at the ground, not able to form a response. I was touched that Uncle Ben cared so much about me. "Would you like to go for a walk?" He seemed nice enough, so I agreed. I had nothing else planned for the day anyways. "So why were you leaving your group early?" He looked curious as he glanced behind me. "I was annoyed, and my friends couldn't come today," I explained. "You certainly have a lot of friends," he teased. "No, just the Cullens," I shrugged. "The Cullens? Oh, they're not supposed to come onto the reservation." He looked away, out toward James Island, as he said this. "Why not?" He glanced back at me, biting his lip. "Oops. I'm not supposed to say anything about that." "Oh, I won't tell anyone, I'm just curious." I tried to make my smile alluring, wondering if I was laying it on too thick. He smiled back, though, looking allured. Then he lifted one eyebrow and his voice was even huskier than before. "Do you like scary stories?" he asked ominously. "I love them," I enthused, making an effort to smolder at him. Jacob strolled to a nearby driftwood tree that had its roots sticking out like the attenuated legs of a huge, pale spider. He perched lightly on one of the twisted roots while I sat beneath him on the body of the tree. He stared down at the rocks, a smile hovering around the edges of his broad lips. I could see he was going to try to make this good. I focused on keeping the vital interest I felt out of my eyes. "Do you know any of our old stories, about where we came from? The Quileutes, I mean?" he began. "Not really," I admitted. "Well, a legend claims that we descended from wolves, and that the wolves are our brothers still. It's against tribal law to kill them. Then there are the stories about the Cold Ones." His voice dropped a little lower. "The Cold Ones?" I asked, not faking my intrigue now. "Yes. There are stories of the Cold Ones as old as the wolf legends, and some much more recent. According to legend, my own great-grandfather knew some of them. He was the one who made the treaty that kept them off our land." He rolled his eyes. "Your great-grandfather?" I encouraged. "He was a tribal elder, like my father. You see, the Cold Ones are the natural enemies of the wolf. Well, not the wolf, really, but the wolves that turn into men, like our ancestors. You would call them werewolves." "Werewolves have enemies?" "Only one." I stared at him earnestly, hoping to disguise my impatience as admiration. "So you see," Jacob continued, "the Cold Ones are traditionally our enemies. But this pack that came to our territory during my great-grandfather's time was different. They didn't hunt the way others of their kind did. They weren't supposed to be dangerous to the tribe. So my great-grandfather made a truce with them. If they would promise to stay off our lands, we wouldn't expose them to the pale faces." He winked at me. "If they weren't dangerous, then why?" I tried to understand, struggling not to let him see how seriously I was considering his ghost story. "There's always a risk for humans to be around the Cold Ones, even if they're civilized like this clan was. You never know when they might get too hungry to resist." He deliberately worked a thick edge of menace into his tone. "What do you mean, civilized?" "They claimed that they didn't hunt humans. They supposedly were somehow able to prey on animals instead." I tried to keep my voice casual. "So how does it fit in with the Cullens? Are they like the Cold Ones your great-grandfather met?" "No," he paused dramatically. "They're the same ones." He must have thought the expression on my face was fear inspired by his story. He smiled, pleased, and continued. "And what are they?" I finally asked. "What are the Cold Ones?" He smiled darkly. "Vampires." He tried to make it sound scary. I wasn't fazed. I stared out at the rough surf after he answered, not sure what my face was exposing. "Pretty crazy stuff, though, isn't it?" No wonder my dad doesn't want us to talk about it to anyone. I couldn't control my expression enough to look at him yet. Don't worry, I won't give you away. I guess I just violated the treaty, he laughed. I'll take it to the grave, I promised, and then I shivered. So do you think we're a bunch of superstitious natives or what? He asked in a playful tone, but with a hint of worry.
I still hadn't looked away from the ocean. I turned and smiled at him as normally as I could.
No, I think you're very good at telling scary stories, though, I smiled. Cool. He smiled. Well, I have to be going now. It was fun. I smiled as I waved goodbye and headed back to my car again. When I finally got home, I took a quick shower to get the salty dried water off my body, and wash my now stinky hair. After I was all cleaned up, I was happy that the day was almost over, meaning time for bed after I made a quick bowl of soup for dinner and headed back up to my room. My mind sure did need a break. I was interrupted out of my sleep by the shrill ringing of my cell phone. I groggily sat up and glanced at the clock. Reading it displayed that it was 4 a.m. Who would call this early? I decided that it would be best to ignore it as I dropped my tired head back to the pillow, and was pleased when the demanding noise stopped momentarily. I let out a groan when the phone started ringing again a moment later and finally pulled myself out of bed before May or Ben would wake up because of it. I trudged heavily over to my purse and pulled out the small silver cell phone. Hello, I croaked out in a husky voice. Bella, are you all right? The alarm sounds of my father came out loud and clear through the phone and I winced at the volume.
Dad, I am fine. Why are you calling so early? I lolled back on my bed and snuggled up under the covers, trying desperately to get warm again.
Oh Bella, we have some good news but it is tied to bad news. I heard him sigh heavily through the phone. Tell me, I said impatiently. Darling, we have to talk in person. I have already set you up on a flight to come home today. I could hear the smile in his voice when he said that I would be coming home. I felt an unexpected pain in my body and mind at the thought of going home and it confused me. Shouldn't I be happy to see my parents again? I knew that I was happy to go home, but something else was keeping me here, and I couldn't seem to fathom it through my thick haze of sleep. All right. What time do I have to be at the airport? I hoped that he passed off the pain in my trembling voice as sleepiness. No such luck. What's wrong? Dad demanded in his urgent father voice. Nothing's wrong, I am just tired, I tried to chuckle. I am excited to see you and Mom again. That thought had me chipper, and I was pleased to hear his relieved sigh on the other end of the line. Okay. Your flight leaves at 6, so you should leave in an hour for the airport, he explained. All right. I will start getting ready. I rubbed my eyes with my free hand and yawned loudly. I love you and will see you soon. I could hear the smile present in his voice as he said these joyous words to me, that I reveled in. Anything to make the pain go away at his moment would be on my good side at the moment. I love you too, Dad. See you soon, goodbye, I smiled as I hung up. I quickly took a shower and fixed my hair up neatly. If I was going to see Mom then I was going to look nice. I wanted her to be proud of me so I slipped on one of the nicer dresses that she had purchased for me. I knew that the price was just over $3,000, and letting her know that I was actually willing to wear it would make her extremely happy. The beautiful cocktail dress had a pansy print on Italian cotton, silk fail and has a strapless, sweetheart neckline and a full skirt with asymmetric pleating. The shoes were bright metallic slingbacks that I knew they cost a fortune but tried hard not to grimace when I put them on and stood up. After I was over 4 inches taller I headed out to finish getting ready. Once I was all finished getting ready for the day I quickly checked the clock and let out a relieved sigh when I noticed that I had only taken a half an hour to get ready. I hurriedly made breakfast for everyone as a quick goodbye. I wouldn't even have time to eat it so I only made just enough for Ben and May. I was sure that Uncle Ben and Aunt May didn't know about my soon-to-be departure so I had to hurry and finish quickly. Once everything was all done, I heard the faint sounds of rustling so I knew that someone was awake. I walked up the steps and knocked tentatively on their door. Aunt May, Uncle Ben? My voice sounded shaky to my own ears. I didn't want to see the disappointment on their faces when I had to tell them that I was leaving. I didn't know if I was coming back or not. My last thought put a horrible knot in my stomach and I almost groaned from the pain that it was dwelling on my insides, and I still didn't know why yet. I would contemplate it later. Yes, dear? May called out through the door. I made breakfast and I need to talk to you guys soon, I hesitantly told them. All right. We will be right down. I heard May say, and then I heard more rustling and the floorboards creaking as she walked around the room. I went back to my room and loaded up a quick carry-on bag for the plane. I didn't pack any clothes because I knew that Mom would have added new stuff to my room even when I wasn't there, so I wasn't particularly worried about a shortage of clothing. I packed a few necessities from around the room and headed downstairs to see that May and Ben were already seated at the table and eating. "How is it?" I questioned as I descended the small staircase. "It's wonderful, dear." Uncle Ben smiled at me as he chewed on the toast that I toasted earlier. "I have some news," I started timidly. "I got a call at 4 this morning from Dad, and well, I will be leaving in a few minutes to the airport," I finished quickly with a breath that I didn't know that I was holding. I saw the shocked faces of May and Ben and lowered my head and I nervously twiddled with my fingers. I was surprised when I felt arms encase me in a loving embrace. "I would hope that you come back here soon, but then I would think of your parents' pain when you aren't with them, so I don't know whether to be happy or sad yet," Aunt May told me as she hugged me tighter. "I am happy to see them again, but I will miss you both greatly until I see you guys again, especially with such short notice." I was on the verge of tears and I knew that I had to keep it together for them, so I smiled at them both before stepping out of May's arms and quickly hugged Ben before saying a quick goodbye and escaping out the door. I made it to the airport in record time thanks to my speeding, but it was still a close call that I made it to the plane on time. They were just closing the doors. Dad had purchased me first-class tickets, so I got to sit mainly by myself except for a few other passengers in the surrounding area. The pain in my chest became more prominent as the plane got further away, and I was almost at tears. It felt like there was a coil in my abdomen and it was about to spring forth a new pain. Was this a cramp? I had cramps before and I knew that they didn't get this bad because I knew that they didn't take place in the heart, and for a second I considered myself having heartburn. In a doctor's opinion, I probably seemed like a mess. I only hoped that the pain would lessen and soon. During the several hours plane ride, I considered the things that Jacob had told me about his legends so I could do something other than not thinking of the pain I was in. I almost checked myself for a bruise. I told myself that I was going to leave the Cullens' secret alone, but when the opportunity of where I might actually figure it out presented itself, I had to take a chance here. My curiosity got the better of me as I thought over the words that the boy had told me only yesterday. It seemed like it was months ago, but in reality it was only yesterday afternoon. Maybe the plane ride was screwing up my time frame. Jacob had talked about the cold ones. The description that he had given me seemed fairly accurate, and I had to disagree when he said that it was just silly story. The feeling that I got at my gut when I thought that the Cullens were vampires seemed strong and instinctive that I had a good feeling it was true. I knew that the Cullens were good, kind people, so I won't judge them through this characteristic. They might drink blood, but at least it's animal. Suddenly an image of Edward hunting a bear came into my mind and I almost moaned in pleasure at even thinking of Edward doing such a thing. It was so sensual. This thought surprised me the most out of all my internal ramblings, and my mind was suddenly stunned into silence as I thought about the pain in my chest and heart. Edward. The pain that had enveloped me into its waiting arms was because of Edward. I could not think of one thought that didn't surround Edward's glorious face. His picture was at the back of my mind this entire time and I was able to ignore it, like something that just has to be done yet you don't know how to deal with it. Well, that's the pain that was now the most important ache in my heart. I knew deep down that the pain wouldn't go away unless I was close to Edward again. I was having an internal battle in my body and I myself didn't seem to even have a single part in it. My heart was screaming at me to run back to Edward while my brain was trying to be the logical thinker in the situation and tell me to listen to whatever my parents would tell me when I get to finally see them after all this time. It has been months, for heaven's sake. When the plane finally descended the sky, I was more than pleased. The pain was at the forefront of my mind the entire rest of the ride now that I was able to identify it, and leaving me unable to sleep while I waited desperately for the large hunk of metal to stop going farther away from Edward. I was almost incapacitated when we finally landed on the ground. I let out a sigh of relief as we approached the terminal in New York. I was in New York and Edward was in Forks. I groaned in pain as I thought of the distance between us, and that brought forth a new unwanted pain in my heart, relaying the fact that he was so much further away from me than I wanted him to be. Oh, Edward. Once the plane had safely descended the sky, we were told to leave the large aircraft. I was immensely pleased when the plane had landed because the pain in my body had stopped increasing, although I was having a bit of trouble breathing. I was also pleased because I was going to see my parents very soon, and I was elated by that thought, making the pain lessen somewhat. Lastly, I was satisfied to be off the plane because of the noise. I didn't know if my hearing was getting more sensitive or it was just generally this loud, but damn, it hurt. Once I had made it through the gates and in the terminal, I was immediately looking out for Peter and Mary Jane. I saw them both when I finally exited the small tunnel. Dad had Mom on his shoulders and she made pretend binoculars out of her hands as she smiled eagerly as she searched the crowd. I chuckled at the sight, my pain lessening a bit. With their superhuman hearing, they managed to hear me and both looked my way impatiently. Bella. They both chorused my name loudly, making surrounding people turn and look their way. Almost at an inhuman speed did they run over to me and scoop me into a giant hug. Once Mom had jumped gracefully off of Dad's shoulders and scooped me into an extremely tight hug. "Mom, I can't breathe," I choked out, and she finally loosened her grip a little. "Oh honey, I am just so glad that my only daughter is finally home," she squealed again. Once I was out of her arms, Dad swept me up into a tight hold next. "Oh Bella," he sighed, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "I missed you, Dad," I sighed. "Missed you too, darling," I could hear the sincerity of his words. "So what's the big news?" I was extremely curious. "Oh dear, we should talk about this at home," I could hear the edge to his voice. "All right," I agreed hesitantly. Once we had hailed a taxicab and drove to the new house and settled in with a nice cup of tea Mom had made me, we started talking. "Well," Dad started with a sigh, "we have figured out the group of people that are trying to expose us," he started tentatively. He shared a loaded glance with Mom, and I looked at them curiously. One of those names stood out on my files, one that we recognized. He took a deep breath before continuing. "A man by the name of Mr. Jason Watson. Mary Jane's father." Mom was now silently crying into Dad's shoulder. It took me a minute to absorb and process this. My grandfather was trying to expose us. The one question that I couldn't seem to make any sense over was, why? Why would he do this? Does he know who we are? Does he know what Mom and Dad are? Does he not love her? The questions shot left and right in my head as I thought this through. "I am confused." I finally managed to speak, but it was no more than a whisper. I was glad that they had their special senses. "We both lived in Forks and grew up as neighbors," Dad started with a sigh. "Did you ever notice the house next door? How it was all boarded up?" He looked at me now as he rubbed soothing circles into Mom's back. "Yes," I answered hesitantly. I had seen it there, but paid it no mind, not thinking that it was even somewhat important. "Well, that was your mother's house," he started again. "She lived there with her father and 2 brothers before I married her, and then we left town. Mr. Watson was never nice to her, always using cruel words and telling her bad things about her mother." I could tell that Dad was suppressing rage. "So when we left, I never really thought about that man again. I just assumed that he had died. Her brothers were the only ones that she had kept in contact with over the years, and they don't know what we are, as they have never seen us again. After further research, I was able to find Mr. Watson and his groupies, and they were arrested. Sadly, I didn't receive any information on whether or not he knew who we actually were." He sighed deeply and kissed the top of Mom's head. "So, it's all over then." I still didn't know what I thought about this. "Yes," Mom's small voice chimed. The ache then became more prominent in my chest as I thought this through. Would I ever see Edward again? Would he want to see me? Does he feel the same pain, which I am currently experiencing? After I finished eating the special dinner that Mom prepared, she sent me into bed, but not before picking out my pajamas. I smiled at her as she tucked me into bed, making me feel like a small child again. "I really liked that dress you picked out today," she beamed at me. "I thought you would," I chuckled. "Am I going back to Forks?" I asked out of the blue, shocking myself and Mom as she unpacked my little bag. It's been on the forefront of my mind, but I didn't want to sound rude. "I don't know," she looked thoughtful. "I think that the thread is completely gone, but I would have to talk to your father," she shrugged. "All right." I looked down at my hands. "You know, sweetheart, you can talk to me," she hinted. "At what? I am not sure." "What?" I asked, confused. "The different looks on your face. When you first arrived, you looked like you were suppressing pain, but when you were here for a few hours, I noticed that you were masking your expression," she said with a knowing smirk. I blushed and looked down at the quilt she had made me, not willing to meet her eyes. "It's a boy, isn't it?" she smiled, as I blushed a deeper shade of crimson. Maybe there really was no lying to her or Dad. They would make me spill the beans quicker than I could even count them. What's his name? Her voice was brimming with excitement. Edward, I mumbled. I was sure that my face was purple by now. Is he your boyfriend? When I looked up at her, she wiggled her eyebrows suggestively. No, I shrugged. Well, then you need to take charge of the situation, she huffed. You are your own woman. Show this boy who's boss, she demanded, then chuckled. You are my daughter, so I know you have confidence, she smiled brightly at me. I didn't even know what to say, but decided against denying her, so I just nodded my head in agreement. I spent the next week as busy as a bee. We went everywhere. Emphasis on the word everywhere, because I think we may have gone to every museum, monumental park, and pool that was in our New York area. We did so many things as a family, that it made the dull pain lessen a bit, it made it more bearable. I think that Mom knew that something was wrong, but thankfully she kept her mouth shut, and didn't bring up Edward again. It hurt too much to think about it. I had a feeling that Mom must have told Dad about Edward because he seemed even more protective of me than usual when a boy would take a second glance at me. I was pretty sure that I might have even heard him growl at one point. At the end of the week, when there wasn't much left to do, the ache would deepen in my chest. I had to fight from crying out in pain. Mom and Dad noticed it when it was at its worst and questioned me, but I just told them I was fine. They weren't pleased but dropped it. So Bella, May and Ben called last night. They wanted to see how you were doing, Mom said casually as we sat at the table, where I ate breakfast. Oh, I said. Trying to keep the sadness out of my voice was difficult, so I figured a clipped answer was best. They just wanted to see what was new, and what you were up to. She leaned forward on her elbows as she spoke, while I noticed Dad had a frustrated scowl on his face. Now I was curious. What is going on? My curiosity got the better of me. Bella, we know that you want to go back to Forks. I am going to have to start working again, and your mom has a lot of class work that needs to be finished, so we decided that you can finish high school there, Dad told me with a heavy groan at the end. I dropped the spoon of cereal back in my bowl, and gaped at my parents. When? How? Why? I seemed to be getting so many different questions this week that I could hardly process a thing, and then they throw this back at me. We know that you miss your friends, dear, Mom winked at me when she said, friends. But, I just got back, I told them, trying to understand. Sweetheart, I would love to come home every day from work and see you here, but this is a sacrifice that has to be made. You miss your friends, and your boyfriend, Dad hissed, boyfriend. Well, that confirmed my suspicions about that. I don't have a boyfriend, I blushed and looked down at my now soggy cereal. Bella, we got you a plane ticket that leaves to Washington tomorrow morning, Mom announced with a sigh of her own. A part of me wanted to go back to Forks to see my friends, especially Edward. I wanted to see Aunt May and Uncle Ben. I didn't want to leave Mom and Dad. I wanted to spend my time in New York. This was my hometown, where I grew up, and I was leaving, again. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to feel. I didn't know how to act. What do I say to that? Is there even a response to that statement? Mostly, I wanted to see Edward again. The plane ride back to Forks was much more pleasant than the ride from Forks. I was actually able to take a nap now that the pain was subsiding with the closeness comfort of home. I slept most of the way back, mostly because I was too exhausted and could now feel a certain relief wash over me like my baby blanket that Mom made me when I was a small child. I was now able to understand the meaning of home is where the heart is, because truly, my heart was left with Edward. He was the specimen of my dreams when I was in Forks, and even thousands of miles away in New York. I loved him too much to even try to disregard him from my mind. This was not some amateur puppy love that most teenagers go through. This was true love. I had a feeling that it would only get stronger over time for me. I didn't know how he felt. I had a feeling that if I told him that I loved him and that I thought we were soulmates, then he would laugh and walk away, breaking my heart in the process. But a part of me truly hoped that he would feel even a fraction of what I felt for him. I think that it would be truly a miracle if he could ever love boring old me. I wondered idly as the plane descended the sky and onto the tarmac if he had felt that pain, the same loneliness of my heart as it was left in Forks when I had left. My hope still stayed strong as I exited the main terminal and went to the spot where I had parked my car a week ago. It felt nice to get in the soft, comfortable seat, like the one place that I had truly belonged. I owned the car, it was in my name, and it was recognizable. It was like the baby blanket effect again as I drove towards Aunt May and Uncle Ben's house. The pain in my chest has all but subsided, and it was almost a relief to knock on the door to where I now considered my home. The new house in New York seemed alien to me now. The only comfort I received there was the fact that my mother and father were in the next room as I slept. Now as I was opening the door to see my aunt looking curiously as she opened the door and then smiling brightly and pulling me into a tight hug as she immediately recognized me, I felt relaxed. "I hope the offer to stay here still stands," I asked a bit sheepishly. "Yes, yes." She pulled on my hand, trying to get me to come indoors. "I am so glad that you are back, my dear," she exclaimed as she tugged me into the living room. Once we were both settled onto the couch, she started in. "How was your trip?" She was too excited. "It was nice to see Mom and Dad again. Oh, and they say, hello, by the way," I told her, just barely remembering what they told me before I got on the plane. "Now I have to call and thank them for sending me my favorite niece." She smiled widely, as if she had just witnessed a miracle. "I am your only niece," I laughed. "Still, it is so wonderful to have you home again." She couldn't stop smiling as she pulled me into another tight hug. It was nice to know that I felt at home. Once again unpacked my little bag, I finally noticed that I was a bit jet-lagged after the light, so I spent the next couple of hours sleeping. The next morning I woke up a bit early since I went to bed earlier than usual. I headed downstairs to make a quick breakfast and was surprised to see Aunt May and Uncle Ben already up and eating. "Morning, sweetheart," Ben greeted me cheerfully. "I am glad you're back for a while." He smiled at me with deep sincerity. I couldn't help but smile back myself. "I am glad to be back," I told him truthfully. I went over to the cabinets and pulled out a box of cereal, and poured myself a bowl. "So do you know when I start school again?" I asked casually, trying to keep in my eagerness. I really wanted to see all of the Cullens and Hales again. I missed them. Also, I missed Edward, even though we had hardly spoken together. I was starting to sound pathetic. I changed my thoughts around a bit when they answered. "Tomorrow morning," May told me, as she finished her toast. So the next morning as I dressed and brushed my hair, not even bothering to put it up, I noticed that I was a little nervous. Outfit on profile. I was almost to the point of shaking as I kissed May and Ben on the cheek and rushed out the door and into my car. My main thought as I pulled up into the busy parking lot was one that had been running through the front of my brain for the past week. Would they be mad at me? I sighed as I reached behind my seat to grab my backpack, and turned back around with surprised jerk when I heard a loud rapping on my window. I put my hand over my heart in a startled motion and smiled when I saw that it was just Alice. I smiled widely at her as I grabbed my bag and exited the car. "Bella, I am so glad you're back," she exclaimed quickly as she pulled me into an extremely tight hug. I almost felt the bruises forming as she squeezed me. "I just knew that you would come back." I always stayed positive while the others sulked, thinking that you weren't going to come back, she rambled on excitedly. "Yes, I am back. I will be back till I finish high school," I told her as I tried to remove her extremely strong vampire arms from my body. "This is so exciting," she beamed as she released me. I felt as if there was a double meaning to her last sentence. My arrival couldn't be that imperative in a vampire's life. She pulled me over to her car and I smiled as I saw that all of the other Cullens were there, smiling brightly at me. I noticed out of the corner of my eye that Edward was also there and his expression was melted into complete relief, and he smiled at me. Without knowing it, he gave me hope that he might have liked me in just the slightest bit. "Hey everyone," I grinned. "My little sis is back," Emmett cheered loudly, turning a few heads. I was completely shocked when he picked me up off the ground and twirled me around until I felt dizzy. "Yeah, I'm back," I mumbled dumbly as I tried to stand straight. I was so wobbly, I felt like I was going to tip over at any second. "God, Emmett, would you look at what you did?" She looked like she's going to pass out. Rosalie all but screamed at him. "I'm good, I promise. Just a little dizzy," I tried to placate them and contain my equilibrium at the same time. It took me a minute, but I was finally able to control myself and stand straight. "Okay," I sighed. "So what have you guys been up to since I left?" "Nothing much. Things are much more fun with you around," Emmett chuckled. "Well, I'm glad that I could amuse you," I said dryly. "You do," he beamed. "But everyone was moping with you gone, especially Eddie," he said as he punched Edward's shoulder lightly. "Eddie?" I raised an eyebrow at him, trying to ignore Emmett's previous comment, even though I smelt a small victory on my side. "Please don't you start with that too," he almost whined as he pinched the bridge of his nose in exasperation. Don't worry, I won't call you Eddie, I teased lightly with a chuckle. So Ed, what did you do while I was gone? I laughed outright, as did the others, and Edward groaned as he started to walk away. I ran up to him, away from our group, and pulled on his arm, making him face me. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have called you that, I apologized, pleading with my eyes. Besides, you are not some chubby man that I call Uncle Ed when I visit for holidays, I giggled. That did him in as he bellowed out a laugh, and I couldn't stop my own smile from growing as his smile brightened up his entire face, making him look younger but even more strikingly beautiful than he already is. A feat that I didn't think he would be able to complete. He was already gorgeous, it almost seems unfair. When he finally stopped his beautiful laughter, he smiled at me, a twinkle in his golden orbs. I am glad you're back, Isabella, he said it with such reverence that I was momentarily taken aback. Are we messing with names today? I believe my name is Bella, I teased him. All right, Bella, he conceded with a crooked smile. Are we still on for Saturday now that you're back? Of course, I came back just so I wouldn't break plans, I giggled. Well then, it's a good thing I made plans, he smiled beautifully at me. I think so too, I grinned back. The next morning I woke up feeling odd, to say the least. I was excited about seeing Edward again, and our trip to Seattle was coming up soon, so I was jittery about that also. The feeling that I was getting was strange yet exhilarating at the same moment. When I opened my eyes in the morning, my vision seemed to improve immensely, and for lack of better words, I felt high. My whole body was tingling with this new sensation, and I had yet to even figure it out. One feeling that I could surely distinguish between these new tingling feelings was an itch. It was a very irritating itch on both my wrists, and I couldn't seem to scratch it. I tried several times to actually scratch at them, but I felt more like a cat doing it, always trying but never succeeding. I then attempted to soak it in water, but that only gave me minor relief. I sighed irritably as I hurriedly dressed for school while doing my regular morning routine. When I was finally pleased with my finished appearance, I headed off to school. May and Ben both waved goodbye as I pulled out of the driveway. When I finally pulled into the school lot, I parked in my usual spot next to Edward's car. I smiled and gave a small wave to all of them as I maneuvered my way out of the vehicle and over to his car. Morning everyone, I greeted as I approached. How's it going, Bella? Jasper asked me. He looked at me curiously, seemingly appraising me with odd critical eyes. Wonderful. You? Oh, just living, he grinned and chuckled, as did the others. I had to fight back the chuckle myself because I was now in on this private joke. So we were just heading to class, come on Jasper, Alice announced suddenly, and in the process she grabbed Jasper's arm and dragged him out of our little group. I didn't miss the look that she shot the others. It was demanding. Alice will be Alice, so I don't know. Yeah, we better head to class. Come on Em. Rose smiled slyly at me as she too pulled Emmett's arm to head out for class, leaving just Edward and myself. That was odd. I finally broke the silence with a chuckle. Agreed. Edward smiled his beautiful crooked smile. So what have I missed when I left? I asked as we slowly started walking towards the school.
Nothing much. Alice went into her hyperactive pixie mode and spent all her free time at the stores or online shopping when she had to be home, he chuckled dryly. I couldn't stop myself from full out laughing at this.
Again, Alice will be Alice. He smiled brightly at me with a special twinkle in his golden eyes that I couldn't place. I smiled back at him, while simultaneously trying to hide the love that I had for him in my eyes. No need to scare him away. That doesn't sound like much fun for you guys, I said with a frown. My thoughts immediately tried to picture Alice running around the house at vampire speed waiting for her orders to arrive from the online shopping. In the end, it would result in making everyone go crazy. Well, Emmett and Jasper had a few wrestling matches. Sometimes I joined in. He smiled widely at me. His pearly white teeth shone brightly. I punched him on the shoulder, hard, trying to ignore the pain in my hand. You could get hurt, I cried. No, I was fine. It was all fun, Edward sighed, a frown adorning his face. I wasn't sure how vampires fought or how well they could get hurt and damage themselves while fighting others, so of course I was worried about him. I didn't love him for nothing. So you weren't in any danger? I demanded. I didn't like it, but if he was fine, I didn't want to seem like some pushy girl that would tell him to do everything. It was just that Emmett looked so strong with all his muscles, and just looking at Jasper you could tell that he had knowledge in fighting. His stiff, straight posture and formal mannerisms at times told me this. I still didn't know how strong a vampire was, and was not willing to let Edward get hurt for a game. No danger, he chuckled. All right. So now that you talked about the others, what have you been doing? I asked curiously. Nothing much actually. A heavy frown crossed his face as he took on a thoughtful look. I studied his features carefully, not wanting to miss a single detail, and certainly not liking the way a frown looked on his face. A person as beautiful as him should never look so sad. It gave him a haunted look that made me cast my eyes downward after a moment of staring at him and studying his features. I looked down at his hands, hanging loosely by their sides, and took one of his cold hands in mine. I tried my best to ignore the electric current that flowed through my entire body at that second, and willed him to look up at me. I wondered idly if he felt the same current that I did because he jumped a little and tried to pull his hand from mine, but I kept a strong hold on his own. What's wrong? My voice rang with concern. He lifted his head and I looked him deeply in the eyes for an immeasurable moment before he finally spoke. Nothing. Then, as if the skies had cleared away to heaven, his expression softened. His entire face took on an entirely different look of pleasure and he smiled his same crooked smile that seemed to light up his entire face. I was left momentarily breathless, so I had to break off the eye contact and look at the ground, blushing madly. We should get to class, I mumbled, pulling my hand away from his. It was in that instant that I had forgotten about the itch in my wrists, and it seemed to come back with a vengeance as I tried to hold back a hiss out of irritation from it. What was this? I was surprised when Edward walked with me all the way to my class. I was worried that he would be late for his next class, but he assured me that he was fine, and waved off my concerns with a flick of his cold hand. I wished almost desperately that I could hold his hand again, and not just to get rid of the irksome itch. His touch was cold, but it seemed to warm my entire body, leaving me with another one of my spells. Throughout the day I noticed that my wrists were starting to hurt more and more, leaving me almost breathless. This was not a pain of emotional indifference like it was on the plane. This was a now burning in my skin. Every time I glanced at them to make sure they weren't on fire, I was always surprised to see that they were just as normal as usual, but that was on the outward appearance. On the inside I was roasting. By lunch I half expected my hands to fall off, but then again that was just my gruesome mind. Everyone was looking at me weirdly when I approached our table. What? I asked, while trying to fight the grimace off my face. Are you all right? Edward looked at me with concern etched on his face. I'm fine. I guess I just feel a little ill, I shrugged. Do you want to go home? You look pale, Edward worried. I didn't think that she could get any more pale, Emmett chuckled, earning him a smack on the back of his head from Rosalie. No, I'll be fine. I tried to smile. I think that it would be bees. Edward started again before I cut him off. Edward, I am going to finish school today, I told him in a voice that left no room for a continued conversation on this subject. All right, he sighed heavily. I was sure I was fine, just an odd little bug that I have. Nothing more. I think that I was trying to assure myself that, while deep down I knew differently. When the dreadful school day finally ended, I drove home in a rush. The burning in my wrists was so painful that I could scream, but I held back the awaiting scream, but couldn't hold back the grimace on my face for the rest of the day. All the teachers thought that I was ill and wanted to send me to the nurse's office while several boys volunteered to take me. I mentally rolled my eyes at them. I was sure that this wasn't exactly an illness, more like a mutation of the genes that are coming around because my 18th birthday is in a few months. I decided that I wouldn't tell Mom and Dad yet about this because they would be so worried and probably just end up bringing me back to New York. I didn't know how I would keep this from them, but I surely don't like the idea of keeping secrets from my parents. I have never lied to them before, and hadn't planned on starting now. So I figured it would be best to skirt around the truth. When I finally pulled up to the house I sighed in relief. I was so glad to be home. I hurriedly ran to the kitchen sink, surprisingly not falling in my heels, and ran my hands under the water. Sighing as I realized that I was clearly only getting minor relief from the cool water, I shut it off and headed upstairs to the bathroom. I took 2 sleeping pills and before I knew it I had passed out on my bed. I didn't sleep well at all. I felt like I could see everything, examine the world from a different side as I looked down from where I stood, letting out a startled yelp and walked backwards. Bella, I heard my name being called from across the 2 tall buildings. What are you waiting for? Dad laughed as he waited for me. "I don't think I can do it," I whispered. Of course he heard it though. "Yes, you can. I will be right here. Just give yourself into the instincts. It will be difficult at first, but you will get the hang of it, and now you can't get hurt." Dad smiled eagerly at me, beckoning me to join him. With a heavy sigh, and a minute of deep breathing, I cast my web out to the building in which my father stood atop of. I couldn't look down as I latched the web onto the top it. Then, I jumped. Pain. The only feeling that I could register as I woke up from my dream in a cold sweat. I didn't know what to do. With a quick realization, I gave into the pain, and let it hold me down as I changed, like my father. I writhed on the bed for what felt like hours, and eventually fell in unconsciousness again. When I woke up the next morning with another realization, the pain was gone. I smiled as I stood up, but was too surprised by the movement that I froze, all my muscles locking down on one another. I moved much quicker than I had anticipated, and I stood frozen in the middle of the small bedroom. Last night came crashing down on me like a ton of bricks, and I couldn't hold back my gasp of surprise. "Bella, you better hurry up or you're going to be late for school," May told me through the door. "Aunt May, I don't feel very well. Can I stay home today?" I almost begged. When I heard her light movements, alerting me that she was opening the door, I jumped back into bed with silent motions. When the door opened all the way, I saw her worried face look me over. "Well, I did receive several calls from your friends asking if you were okay. Should I take you to the hospital?" I hadn't known anyone called yesterday. I must have really been out of it. "No, I am just going to catch up on some sleep," I tried to lie. "All right then, I will call the school. You should call your parents," she instructed. I figured that I could tell them that I had caught a cold, and hopefully they would believe me. "Okay," I sighed. "All right dear, feel better now," she smiled before leaving the room. I made a quick call to Mom and Dad, letting them that I would be home sick today, so that May wouldn't tell them and have it be a surprise. They were worried because I had just gotten back here the other day, and offered to come and stay with me here for a while. I laughed and said that I would be fine and how it was just the common cold. Once I was dressed in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, I was off. I knew that Aunt May was out with some friends today, so I didn't have to worry about her or Uncle Ben because he was at work for the day. I headed out the back door to the surrounding forest and took off into a dead run. I was so quick that I was surprising even myself with not only the speed but the sight as well. I could see every little detail that the woods held, and I was entranced with the scene around me as I ran. I could see the smallest details of the flowers, the small indentations of the dirt where animals had been in past. It was truly beautiful, and I was eager to explore more. I knew that I was avoiding the one thing that I was truly nervous about doing. My dream last night had given me little courage to actually do, and as I looked down at my wrists that now held a small white spot where I knew the webs worked. I had flown with Dad a lot and he had taught me how he used them, so I figured that I would know the basics but no more than that. I knew that if he was here with me at the moment, he would teach me, but then I would go back to New York, away from Edward. I shuddered at the thought and looked up at the trees. I had seen Dad climb different buildings many times, the microscopic thorns held on tight to cement and glass, but would it be the same for a tree? I didn't know, and that worried me. I slowly put one hand on the tree and sighed as I realized that it actually stuck there. Maybe this wasn't going to be so difficult. I put my other hand in front of me and on the tree by my right hand. Slowly I moved them upward. I started to freak out a bit when I realized that I would have to put my feet on the tree if I wanted to move any higher. Slowly, I eased my right foot up and placed it so only the tip was holding me. I smiled as I realized that it still worked with my tennis shoes on. I placed my left foot up too and realized with stunned disbelief that I was a foot off the ground, and there wasn't a ladder around. I smiled. Leisurely I made my way up to the top of the tree. I grinned widely when I looked overhead. Everything, it was so beautiful. I could see so far out into the ocean that I was surprised that I managed to see some of the boats out miles away. I looked out to my left and saw the La Push beach. It was deserted, but from this angle I could see how wonderful it really was. I realized belatedly that I was still stalling with my web practice, so I gradually stood up and looked at the tree a few meters away. I did the calculations in my head as I looked across the small distance, thinking that I might be able to make it. I cast my web out and smiled slightly as it landed perfectly on the tree branch that I wanted it to. With a deep breath and a small yelp, I jumped. The wind in my hair was a wonderful feeling, but as I crashed into the tree and landed on the branch that I wanted to with a loud thump was certainly not my intended result. I rubbed my face from the crash. It didn't hurt, but it certainly felt weird to not have it hurt. I let my web out again, and this time it landed on the branch from where I had previously stood. I sighed and made my second leap into the air, this time landing perfectly on the branch but in a crouching position. I repeated the process for some time before I realized that May would probably be home soon from her friends, so I quickly crawled down the tree and made it to the forest floor with a light thud as I had jumped the last 5 feet. I swiftly ran back to the house, not taking as much time as I had before to notice my surroundings, but really smelling the air for the first time. I took in deep lasting breaths as I smelled and tasted the precious air. It felt so natural to be out here, and in the wooded area. I drank up as much air as I could as I ran home. It just tasted so sweet. I knew that Dad had told me that's where we get all of our energy, so it was important that we breathe almost all the time. Although we can go without air for a few days, we just get weak. Aunt May wasn't home yet, so I hurried back upstairs and slipped on my tight blue pajama shorts and tank top and glanced at the clock. I had been gone for 6 hours in the forest. I hopped back in bed but was surprised when I heard a knocking on the door. I got out of bed and walked down the stairs at a human pace and opened up the door and was greeted by all of the Cullens and Hales. "Bella!" Alice yelled as she leapt at me. I stumbled back a bit out of surprise, and looked at the elfin girl that was still clinging to me. "Oh God, I thought you were dead," she sobbed. My eyebrows must have shot up to my hairline as I spoke back to her in a calm voice. "Alice, I am alive. I was homesick today," I tried to soothe her as I stroked her spiky hair. "I'm sorry, I just got worried." She got off of me but wouldn't let go of me completely. "Why would you think I was dead?" I asked, curious. She stiffened as she answered, "You weren't in school." She shrugged nonchalantly. She was lying. I raised an eyebrow at her. "Well, why don't you guys come in?" I suggested to the others as they still stood outside. The only reason Alice was in now was because she was clinging to me still. Once everybody was inside and the door was closed, Alice and Rosalie ran up to my room, deciding that they were going to choose my clothes for tomorrow, and of course Jasper and Emmett followed behind them chuckling as the girls dragged them up the stairs with them. "So how are you feeling?" Edward asked as we took a seat in the living room. He looked like he was studying me for a bit. "You look different," he decided. "I do?" This was certainly a surprise to me. "Yes," he left it at that. "What did you do today?" Edward broke the silence again. "Nothing much, just slept." I shrugged but kept my eyes downcast. Mom always called me an open book. I didn't need him to figure out that I was lying. I was surprised when he pulled my chin up with his fingers. They were still cold, but not as cold as before to my skin. I looked him in the eyes, and smiled slightly. "What did you do today?" I asked as he looked me deeply in the eyes. I was surprised that I could breathe at the moment, let alone talk a coherent sentence. He dropped his hand from my chin but smiled his dazzling smile. "It was pretty boring actually without you there." He chuckled as I blushed. "Oh, and I brought you something." He smiled widely as he pulled out something from his school bag. I hadn't even realized that he had it with him. He handed me a piece of paper and I groaned as I realized that it was school work. "Mr. Banner gave it to me, to give to you," he smiled. "I thought sick days were for relaxing, not schoolwork," I whined. Edward chuckled again. "Give me a book to read instead," I whined again. "Yes, I do prefer to read over doing schoolwork." His perfect smile never left his face. The rest of the group came rushing down the stairs at that moment and smiled widely at me. I narrowed my eyes at them. "What?" My voice rose from irritation. I could see Jasper and Emmett snickering. "Don't mind them, Bella. We just picked out your outfit for tomorrow," Rosalie told me with a giggle of her own. I had no idea what was so funny, so I just let it go for now. "So what are you guys doing tonight?" I asked as they made their way over to Edward and I. "We are actually going on a family camping trip." Emmett smiled eagerly. I guessed that he liked camping. Did vampires even go camping? "All right." I tried to hide the sadness in my voice. "How long are you going to be gone?" "We will be back on Monday," Alice promised me. "Okay," I smiled. "So now I won't have to assume that you were dead," I snickered. "You weren't in school, and I was worried," she tried to defend herself. "Sure." I raised one eyebrow at her, letting her know that I didn't believe her for a second. "We have to get going now, but I am glad that you are feeling better, Bella," Jasper said as waved a quick goodbye before leaving. I noticed idly that all of their eyes were black. I wondered if that meant that they were thirsty. "All right. Have fun," I smiled as I waved them all out as we headed to the door. "Bye, Bella," Edward sighed as he kissed my cheek, before he left outside the door. I hadn't realized that I was holding my breath as the car door slammed shut outside, bringing me out of my Edward-induced trance. Then, a thought hit me. I was going to be alone for 2 days, without Edward. 2 days locked in the house without any real form of entertainment really bites the big one, no pun intended. Since Edward had to go out with his family this weekend, that meant that our trip to Seattle would have to take place next weekend. Edward assured me that we would go the next coming weekend, so I wasn't worried, more excited actually. The thought of just Edward and I, without his family going out together, to a big city, sent jolts of thrills down my spine as I lazed around the house on Saturday. I was too anxious to just wait around for him to get back and couldn't sit down for a minute with all my pent-up energy, so I hurried up the stairs and slipped on an extremely short yellow skirt and a tank top before rushing back down the stairs. "Where are you off to?" Aunt May asked as she walked into the room with a cup of tea. "I think that I'm just going to go for a walk," I smiled at her as I slipped on a pair of designer tennis shoes. "Oh, Mother. Have fun." She waved her hand dismissively. She didn't know what I was up to, and I knew that I couldn't tell her because then she would end up telling Mom and Dad, which would ultimately get me sent back to New York. I wasn't going to let that happen. "Do you have any plans today?" I asked as I slipped on a pair of gloves for show. They were coming right off when I went outside. "I will probably do some reading, and finish that scarf that I was making for Ben." She looked thoughtful. "All right, don't have too much fun," I chuckled. "Well, I am sorry that I can't be some hip teenager these days," she chuckled with me. "Bye," I waved as I exited the door. Once outside I looked around and was pleased to see that I was all alone. I quickly sprinted over to the surrounding forest and cast the web from my right hand up to the first branch I saw. I landed with perfect agility on side of the tree, and I was happy to see that I had gotten it right on my first try. I jumped up so I was standing on the branch where I had first planted my web. I smiled as I flung another web out onto a higher branch of the tree a few feet next to the one I was on and swung up to it. I grabbed the branch and pulled myself up on top of it. I looked down at the ground and was surprised at how high up I was. A couple 100 yards to the ground, and I didn't even feel the slightest bit sick at the height of it. I never was truly afraid of heights. I just think that it's kind of scary to be so high up from the ground, but now I had my own little lifesaver. I swung from branch to branch for about an hour before I heard an odd sound. I looked to the ground, startled. I let out a small squeak as I eyed the source of the sound. A large beast. I hurriedly climbed up the tree till I couldn't get any higher away from the animal. I was on the edge of a clearing, I noticed as I looked down at the large animal. I watched, stunned, as 3 other large wolves emerged from other sides of the forest. I sat hidden in the tree that was concealed from a large fir tree as the enormous wolves growled loudly at each other. I didn't dare move an inch. I wasn't even sure if I was breathing at that moment as 3 figures emerged from the one empty side of the clearing. I belatedly realized that the wolves weren't snarling at each other, more like the 3 people who were growling back, just as viciously. There were 2 males and 1 female in the group, and upon closer inspection, they all had bright red eyes. I tried to cover my squeak with my hand, but it was too late. The male with his blonde hair tied in a ponytail looked up at me and smiled wickedly. Shivers crept up my spine. The 3 people were each in a crouching position as they hissed at the large wolves. The largest wolf, the darkest colored one, took a step forward, and the other 3 wolves slowly blocked the people in a small circle. I didn't dare see what happened next as I flung out my web as far as I could get without hitting another tree and flew through the tall trees until I was safely in my backyard again. I sighed in relief, knowing that the wild beasts and 3 vampires were miles away from me at the moment. I tried to control my breathing before I entered the house. "I'm home," I called into the seemingly empty house. In here, I heard Uncle Ben call from the living room. I walked in and smiled politely at the 3 people there. Aunt May was knitting on the couch by the fireplace, seeming to ignore the 2 men in the room. "Hello," I greeted, the man I had never seen before. "Bella, this is my good friend Charlie Swan," Uncle Ben smiled as he introduced us. "Charlie, this is my niece, Bella." I quickly shook Charlie's hand before sitting on the empty chair. "Nice to finally meet you, Bella. Ben here won't stop talking about you when we go out fishing." Charlie laughed and Uncle Ben shook his head at Charlie. All right, Ben called the attention back to himself. "We are just getting ready to head out. Do you need anything, Bella?" Nope, I'm good, I told him as I picked up my book from the coffee table. I'll be back in a couple hours, Uncle Ben said as him and Charlie stood up to leave. Bye, Aunt May and I said in unison. How was your walk, dear? May asked as she continued her knitting. Fine, I answered curtly, remembering the large wolves that I had forgotten about a moment ago. I hoped that I would have forgotten about them completely, but they just had to be brought up again. Cue my mental sigh. I sometimes wish I had memory loss to get these types of images out of my mind. Fine, Aunt May used the same tone of voice that I had and raised an eyebrow at me questioningly. I am going to go read in my room, I told her, heading for the stairs. All right, she called, sounding flustered by my odd responses. We both knew that this wasn't how I usually acted. I stripped out of my now dirty clothes from the day and slipped on a silk nightgown. I was exhausted from my day outside and decided on snuggling under the covers to read. I wasn't sure what time it was, but I woke up in the dark. Had I fallen asleep? I sat up and something hard fell from my grasp. I got out of bed and flipped on the lights, slightly scared. I wasn't sure what I was scared of, but there was a nagging feeling in my gut as I searched my empty room for an intruder or something. I picked up the book from my bed and set it on the nightstand before flipping off the lights once more. I wasn't sure what I was frightened of more. There were two things that would easily frighten me now. There were the large wolves, which I was sure were murderous from the growls that were coming from their chests. They could possibly be dead at the moment, but I wasn't sure. They still seemed dangerous and probably held up their own well in the recent battle. Then there was the vampire. I didn't get a great look at the red-headed woman or the man with messy dreadlocks, but the man with dirty blonde hair had frightened me the most at the moment. I don't know if it was because he had smiled that eerie smile or because he had looked me in the eye, but I was sure that he scared me the most out of those beasts. Monday couldn't come fast enough. The weekend turned out to be worse than planned. I expected a boring few days at home, but what do I see? A deranged vampire, and a couple creepy horse-sized wolves. This was certainly not planned on my agenda for the weekend. I was just glad that Monday was finally here. I needed to see Edward and the Cullens again. I missed them. After getting dressed and fixing my hair up in a headband, I headed off towards the school. Bye, May, Ben, I called as I ran past them and out the front door to my car. I parked next to the Cullens' car before quickly grabbing my school bag and heading out. Hey, Bella, they called in unison at the same time I called, hey guys, and laughed lightly. How was your weekend? I asked as Edward came to stand beside me. Fine. Rather boring without you there. He smiled as I tilted my head up to look at him. I hadn't realized he was that close to me. How was yours? About the same, nothing much happened, I shrugged through my lie. Okay. His tone told me something else. We're going to class now, he told his family before catching my hand in his strong, cold one and walking away from the others. Are you going to tell me what happened? He startled me by speaking after a few minutes of silence. What? I tried to play innocent, it didn't work. What you did this weekend? You might have fooled the others, but you can't fool me, he smirked. Oh, well, I didn't do much. I went for a walk in the woods, that's about it, I stuttered. Did you see something in the woods? He was good? No, my answer was curt, almost to the point of it being rude, but there was no way I was going to tell him what I saw. I doubt he would even believe me if I were to tell him the truth. He stopped walking and pulled on my hand, so I had to stop with him. He spun me around until I was facing him. Why don't you want to tell me? He ran his smooth fingers along my hairline and curled his finger around a loose strand of hair before tucking it behind my ear. It was the strange feeling I got when he did that, making me tremble as he looked into my eyes. Please tell me, he whispered, taking a step closer. I was sure there wasn't an inch of air between our bodies. I could feel the cool chill of his body temperature as if he was pressed against me tightly. I wasn't even sure if he was. All I could focus on in that moment were his eyes. I was scared, and I didn't want you to be scared too, I blurted without a coherent thought in my mind. Why were you scared? He stroked my hair again. I gave in to the burning pressure in my body and leaned my head against his freezing chest, letting his arms envelope around me. The warm cotton of his shirt seemed to match the temperature of his body, but it was still more than a little comfortable. I had never felt anything better than this in my entire life. His soft but cold hands continued to hold me tightly against himself, and I let out a sigh before I pulled back a little, but not enough to leave his arms. I still couldn't look him in the eyes as I answered. I don't want to talk about it, please, I whispered, becoming desperate. There were times when I was strong and could handle difficult situations, but having Edward hold me seems to make me lose all sense of myself and just give my emotions away to him. My previous strength losing itself without my permission, but I guess being in Edward's arms is better than having that element. All right, he conceded with a heavy sigh. We need to get to class, he commented after a minute. Okay. I reluctantly left the comfort of his embrace and looked around. Where is everybody? The halls were almost empty other than 2 kids at the end of one talking. Edward and I were the only others around. The bell is just about to go off, he said as he hurriedly rushed me down the few corridors and to my classroom door. I will see you at lunch. He kissed my cheek with the lightest of pressure before heading down the next hallway. My cheek tingled with a warm sensation. His lips were so soft and smooth. I almost purred. I was not late for class. I spent my next few classes in a daze, taking notes but not really listening to the teacher's words being said. I was basically on autopilot in my mind, and my body was just following my regular actions. When I was heading for lunch, I was more than a little surprised when I finally noticed people staring at me oddly. I hurried to the lunchroom and took my usual seat at the oval-shaped table, skipping the food line. Bella. I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me? I looked up at Emmett and saw that his hand was over his heart in mock hurt. What didn't I tell you? What had I missed? That you were dating my brother, and you were pregnant with his love child. Emmett seemingly couldn't hold it in any longer as he threw his head back and burst out into loud guffaws that made the strange table vibrate and shake as he pounded his fists on it from his laughter. Thankfully Rosalie chose that moment to walk by and hit Emmett on top of the head before we could attract any more unwanted attention from the peanut gallery. The rest of the group showed up then and took their seats. Edward smiled as he sat down next to me. Would you care to elaborate, Em? I asked once everybody was seated. Well, I overheard Jessica earlier and she was complaining about how you lied to her about having Edward as your boyfriend. Then she went on in quite a lot of, he cleared his throat and leaned in closer to me, detail about how she heard you two doing the nasty in the janitor's closet. He whispered the last part conspiratorially. You know what? I looked at him evenly for a moment. I think she might have been on to something. I nodded my head, and they all gasped, but I continued. If I even knew where the janitor's closet was, I laughed, and they soon broke out into loud laughs also. Rosalie couldn't seem to stop Emmett this time as his laughter all but shook the building. A few people left the cafeteria. Their instincts must have kicked in. Alice just giggled louder when she saw this, as did I. Well, I heard that you two were in a pretty strong lip lock. That's why Edward was late to his homeroom class. Jasper let out a chuckle at the new rumor. You were late? I looked up at him just in time to see a small shrug of his shoulders. You didn't have to be late. I could have walked to class by myself. I frowned at him. It was worth it, spending that extra time with you. He smiled and started twirling my hair in his long fingers again. Besides, I didn't even get in trouble. He grinned, and I could easily tell that all he really had to do was smile at his teacher and she would have been dazzled enough to not know that he was late. Oh great, they're at it again, Rosalie complained. What? I asked her, confused. Do you not see yourself? She asked me while I just looked at her dubiously. You guys just need to kiss or something, but I am afraid that if you do, you won't be able to stop for a very long time, she shuddered delicately. I agree with Rose, you two are so intense all the time, it's almost creepy. My advice is to just give into what y'all are feelin', don't come round here no more if y'all are gonna be like that, Jasper said, insightfully with a southern accent. I am not intense, I couldn't help but to argue. It seemed like a second nature to argue back when someone tells me something. Jasper and Rosalie just rolled their eyes at me. Maybe they really are birth twins. They seem very alike in some ways. If they looked more similar than just matching blonde hair, I would say that they are. I was beyond mortified in this moment though and tried my best to get over the overwhelming feeling, but it stuck with me as I put my head in my hands and flushed a brilliant red. I waited very impatiently for the earth to suck me into a black hole. There was no way that I could even look at Edward in this pathetic moment in my life. I suggest you keep your thoughts to yourself and do not vocalize them, hissed a furious voice to my left. I looked over at Edward in surprise. I had never seen anyone so striking. I mean angry. The look in his eyes as he glared at everyone was one that could have killed a tree, without a saw. I didn't think that it was possible, but his expression told me otherwise. Beautiful. Edward, I tried to say in a normal voice, but it came out more whisper. He looked down at me and his expression immediately softened and he raised an eyebrow in question towards me. It's fine, really, I shrugged but continued. Let them have their fun, we know it's not true. There it is not necessary to get all worked up over something as silly as this. My voice rose when the words were finally out and true. There are a lot of more important things to be stressed about. This situation was just high school dramas gone a bit out of control from a hug. I had many other worries to think about rather than these ridiculous interactions between classmates and joking with the family. Like a disturbed vampire, some large wolves, and the fact that I had yet to speak to my parents about my almost completed change. Yes, there certainly were more important things at this moment in time. I just wish that these little dramas were what was important, not the big things. But I knew it wasn't true, just wishful thinking on my part. It seemed really self-centered of me to want these little things to be the center of my life. The fact that there is much more going on in my existence seemed to want to take part of me even though I was pushing it back. It seemed most prudent to go back to New York and live with Mom and Dad again. I would have Dad show me how to use my web and teach me how to swing from building to building like he does. My abilities are only half there and I am sure there is still much more to learn. He could teach me. There was one problem to this though. My heart was in Forks. Could I leave my heart behind to follow what I was born to do? No, I would need Edward with me, but I didn't want him to get hurt from the dangers that surround my life. He may be a vampire, but I didn't know what he could and couldn't do, so there were still many risks. This would probably be too much to handle and he would leave me alone, and I would go back to New York, where I belong. My heart clenched at the thought of being without Edward for any amount of time. Going home at the end of the day is hard enough as it is. Bella? Bella. I gazed around and saw everyone staring at me oddly and looking alarmed. Yes? I asked after a moment of awkward silence. Edward, bless him, broke it. You just spaced out for about 10 minutes. Are you okay? We have been trying to get your attention, you haven't even blinked and you started talking. He looked at me fearfully now. Oh, I had nothing else to say. Sorry, I added as an afterthought. It's no worry, Bella, Rosalie said as she placed her cold hand upon mine. Edward and I walked to biology class in silence. It wasn't until we were in class a few minutes early did he start talking. The teacher ran out just as we walked in, mumbling about a lost worksheet, so we took our seats in back. Bella? I gazed up at him in surprise at first. I hadn't heard his voice since after we had spoken at lunch, and it's been about half an hour. Yes? I nodded for him to continue speaking since he looked hesitant to do so. I was just wondering something. It's none of my business really, I was just curious, really, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, he rambled. What is it, Edward? I tried hard not to laugh at his nervous expression. At lunch, he started with a sigh. During your daydreaming, I think that's what it was. Anyways, you said something about moving back to New York. He took a deep breath and looked at me again, the look I remember from earlier, fear. Edward, I am not going anywhere. I ran my hand through my hair as I took a deep breath, trying to calm my frazzled nerves. You're not? His gaze looked hopeful and I nodded my head with a small smile. Did he want me to stay? I could only hope to be as lucky to be on the receiving side of his emotions. It was a wistful dream of mine, but one that I desperately hoped would happen for me. Maybe it has. Edward, my heart is in Forks. I flushed slightly, hoping that he hadn't caught on to much. I turned my head away before he could realize what I said and continued on. I always like it here. I never got to visit much, only during the holidays, and I wished that I would have more often. I even have some wonderful friends here. I looked back up at him, and was pleased to note that I couldn't feel the heat of my blush anymore. Right, he murmured quietly, and looked up as the teacher walked in with our worksheets. My last 2 classes passed by quickly and I soon found myself driving to the Cullens' house, with Edward in my passenger seat. You haven't said much since biology, care to share what's going on in that head of yours? I patted his knee reassuringly. It's nothing, he mumbled and fixed his amber eyes on out the window. Please tell me. I grabbed his hand from his lap, but kept one hand on the steering wheel. It's not important, he sighed. Everything you say is important, I grinned at him with a wink. Doubt it, he murmured quietly, but continued to hold onto my hand. Edward was mostly quiet and kept to himself as the day progressed further, and I was starting to truly worry about him. I wasn't sure what was going on in his mind, but I tried to stay optimistic in the idea that he had lost a CD or something trivial such as that. The rest of the day passed without incident other than Edward's slightly strange behavior. I went to the Cullens' house after school and spent some time with everyone. I talked with Esme for a while about gardening. She was thinking about decorating the outside of the house with red and white fuchsias because there was such little sun here. We laughed at some of our corny gardening jokes while the rest of family that was in the room rolled their eyes at us and continued to play with the Xbox in the living room. New gardeners learn by trial and error. She laughed at my crappy joke. A weed is a plant that has mastered every survival skill except for learning how to grow in row. We both laughed heartily at her joke. It was like being home with Mom again. When I got home and said a quick goodnight to Aunt May and Uncle Ben, I went to bed. I talked to Peter and Mary Jane in the morning before heading out the door for school. Nothing much was going on, so the conversation didn't last very long other than a quick list of what I did the day before. When I passed May and Ben to go out the door, I waved quickly before heading out the door. I almost missed Edward as I walked over towards my car. "Oh, Bella?" I spun around in surprise to see Edward leaning against the passenger side of his Volvo. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't hold back my gasp of surprise at seeing him here. I was usually mentally prepared by the time I get to the school. This was a shocker. "I thought that I would give you a ride today," he shrugged casually and opened the passenger door for me. There wasn't a chance that I wouldn't take to be without Edward for a moment, so I hurriedly rushed to his car and buckled myself in. He was in the driver's seat and starting the car before I had a chance to finish buckling myself in. "Is there a reason for this?" I asked after a moment of silence. "Well, yes." He looked slightly embarrassed, so I figured I would change the subject. "Where are the others?" We were the only ones in the car, and it was strange because his Volvo was always full with people. Well, the correct term would be vampires, but I didn't feel like mentioning that. "Rosalie wanted to drive today, so they're with her. I thought that I would pick you up." He shrugged again. I noticed idly that he has been doing that a lot, just shrugging off his emotions. "Edward, what's going on?" "What do you mean?" He got the scared look in his eyes again, but he couldn't just keep shrugging everything off. It was time to face it. "Whatever it is." "You have been acting strangely," I started, but he cut me off. "No, I haven't," he lied, terribly. "Edward," my tone was one of warning. "Bella," he sighed and ran his hand through his hair, without looking at me before he caved. Once he parked in the school lot, I noticed that there weren't that many cars here yet, so he turned the car off and turned to look me in the eye. "Bella, there is a reason I was worried when you started to talk about New York yesterday," he sighed. I quirked an eyebrow at him, waiting for him to continue with this explanation. "When you said that your heart was in Forks, I understood. Not because we haven't visited before or for family like you have said to me. I agree with you that my heart is in Forks because you are in Forks." Edward looked at me meaningfully for a moment before dropping his eyes to his lap. I must have sat there for what felt like an hour with my mouth opened and eyes wide, looking like a complete imbecile. My thoughts were running wild in my head and I couldn't seem to take control of a single one of them. I was too stunned to form a coherent word, let alone a thought. I was even more surprised when Edward got out of the car and started walking towards the school. His head hung low. Rejection. How could he have thought that my stupidity would be rejection? I should be the one feeling rejection, not him. I swiftly exited the car, just barely remembering to grab my purse and school bag, and rushed out into the sprinkling rain. Edward was still walking, head down, almost halfway across the parking lot because of my lack of intelligence. I ran to him as fast as I could and still pass as a human. I turned quickly and stopped right when I was in front of him. He crashed into me with a small thud, obviously not hearing my arrival, and he caught me just in time as I was starting to fall to the ground. "Bella? Are you okay?" He sounded completely panicked now. I stood up straight and looked directly into his sorrowful eyes as I threw my arms around his neck, bending his head down so he was slightly closer to me, and kissed him. His lips were everything I had imagined them to be, except much, much better than my imagination. They were sweet, as if he had just been eating a bag of cotton candy instead of drinking from some deer nearby. They moved in perfect synchronization with mine, and it was heavenly. The kiss didn't last quite as long as I had hoped, but when I pulled back for a quick gulp of air, I said the words that I have been waiting for so long to say to him. "I love you too, Edward, always." We both smiled, peaceful smiles. Edward led me through the hallways of our last class and smiled as he passed his siblings, each one of them looking at us with open curiosity. Well, so was the rest of the school, but we have been successful at ignoring them all so far. When the final bell rung, signaling the end of the school day, Edward couldn't seem to wipe the smile off of his face, not that he had all day though. He told me that he was waiting for our alone time of the day. He said it was too crowded in the school, and he wanted to talk in private. I wasn't going to speak aloud and say that I was hoping that we wouldn't be doing much talking and more kissing. I smiled and felt my toes curl a little as I thought of that wonderful first kiss earlier. It was like a dream, a wonderful sensual dream that I thought was doomed to ever occur in reality. Now that it had actually happened, I couldn't wait for it to ensue again. I was slightly nervous though. I knew the time was coming. I was just dreading it. I had a feeling that Edward would be mad at me because I knew about him being a vampire, and didn't let him know that I knew earlier. I was worried because even though we had admitted our feelings to each other doesn't mean that this is a forgivable action on my part, and I was truly hoping that it wasn't going to affect our newfound relationship. Edward smiled a wide smile at me as he opened the passenger side door of his car for me. His smile was brilliant and I could tell that he doesn't have a trouble in the world at the moment, and if he did he was just going to push it away for the time being. I think I fell into the car instead of just sitting down because I was more than a little dazzled by his eyes and smile as I took my seat. Edward slipped into his seat, gracefully, and started the engine. I want to take you someplace special. Do you mind going for a little bit of a hike? That sounds nice, I agreed. Walking with Edward sounded wonderful, except I was worried that with me being in his presence, I could lose my footing, like earlier. Oh boy. This has disaster written all over it. I can carry you if you want, Edward spoke, bringing me out of my thoughts. Can you read my mind? I asked him, seriously. To my complete surprise, he laughed. Not just a slight chuckle either, this was a full-on belly laugh that slightly shook the car. I had never seen him this free before. His laughter was melodic and held such a sweet tone that I could help but to smile at seeing this side of himself. Edward calmed down a bit and pulled my hand to his lips, giving me a small kiss on the knuckles and just holding onto my hand, he smiled. If there was one thing that I could have other than you, it would be your thoughts, he told me. It was quiet after that. I had nothing to really say to that last comment and I didn't want to interrupt the quiet peace that surrounded the car. We were just happy. From the outside I would say that anybody who looked in at us would say that we were just another teenage couple, not a vampire boy and a spider girl. I felt normal at least when I was with Edward. Edward parked the car at what looked like the end of a hiking trail and I was pleased to note that it looked flat and easy to walk on. He opened the door for me and the smile never left his face as he pulled me into his arms and closed the passenger side door. You never did answer my question if you wanted me to carry you or not, he commented, breaking our peaceful silence. I couldn't tell if he was serious or not. I have 2 capable feet, Edward. I think I can walk, he laughed at my sarcastic retort. It's just that you looked frightened earlier when I mentioned hiking. I don't want you to be distressed about this, he fretted needlessly. I certainly wasn't as clumsy as I was when I first moved here, but since I met Edward, he always seems to dazzle me into a puddle of goo at his capable feet. It was completely unfair. I can walk, I assured his worries. We hiked up through the thick brush of the forest for 36 minutes before I glared at the watch on my wrist and looked at Edward, trying my best to smother my glare. I thought we were taking the trail. My irritation shone through to him clearly. The place I want to take you to is the opposite direction that the trail leads to, he smirked when he saw my annoyance. The offer is still open if you want me to carry you, he held out his hands. I looked at them for a minute, contemplating. We would probably get there a lot quicker if he just carried me. I could have run at a steady pace for a while without getting tired, but that would have alerted him to the fact that something was different about me. I still hadn't even let him know that I knew what he is, so that was going to have to wait for a little while. All right, I agreed, much to his surprise. Edward's eyes widened and his jaw dropped. He clearly wasn't expecting me to agree to that, but when he snapped out of his daze a moment later there was a spark in his eyes he didn't have a moment prior to my agreement. He didn't conceal his eagerness for this very well and his wide smile was blinding as he beamed at me. Don't go fast, I warned him as I stepped beside him. Edward bent his back slightly and I jumped up a few inches until my arms were locked securely around his neck. My legs wrapped themselves around his waist and he held onto my ankles as he restarted the trek up through the heavy forestry. I was at the stage of complete comfort as Edward walked lithely through the woodland area and I clung on to him like a small toddler holding onto her parents. The only conversation we held for the rest of the walk was him pointing out various types of trees and plants. I had never really seen a lot of trees in my life, So seeing all these and actually getting some names from Edward made it seem like it was a really important fact to know all of the beautiful greens now that I wasn't struggling to walk through it. We walked well. Edward walked for about another hour going at a speed that would be level to walk but still managing to go a bit faster, and ultimately getting us there quicker. When Edward slowed and then stopped suddenly, I knew we were close. I just wondered why he stopped in the middle of the forest. "Where are we?" I questioned him dubiously as I glanced around the spot we stood that looked like any other spot we passed for the past 2 hours of walking. I hopped off of his back not so gracefully. The long walk made my legs stiffen slightly, so I wobbled my numb feet until they gave out a moment later and I went crashing to the ground. I was expecting the feeling of the hard ground underneath me as I went down, so I was surprised to feel the smooth marble of Edward's arms around my waist as he grasped my body to himself tightly. "I'm good," I said after a moment of silence. He still hadn't let go, and I didn't want him to. The sweetest sensation was flowing through my entire body, almost like electricity, except this was a pleasant feeling that I didn't want to go away. Edward hadn't said a thing to me since we stopped, so I was a little stunned by his silence. He was a chatterbox the entire way up here, so why the silent treatment? Edward released me quickly and gestured with his now free hands for me to go ahead of him without saying a word. I walked the next couple of yards in silence, knowing that he was keeping pace with me easily. I didn't hear him, but I could certainly feel him behind me. I could see some light shining through, so I hurried to make my way forward. Once I broke through the trees, I couldn't contain my gasp of excitement as I gazed around the beautiful meadow. The field was filled with tall grass and many flowers that I knew how to identify because Mom had always enjoyed gardening. There were cosmos, five-spot, Iceland poppy, catchfly, bluebonnet, and even candytuft that I was able to identify. I was shocked to see that there were those that I could identify because most were not native to the area and were not supposed to be able to grow and survive here, but they are. It was barely spring. This made no sense.
"Edward, this is breathtaking." I literally took a deep breath, as if I were savoring the sweet scent of the combinations of exotic flowers at this time of the year. "Did you plant these?"
Do I look like the type of person who would spend my time planting flowers in the middle of the woods? He chuckled lightly at the idea. I turned around so I could face him fully now. I took the 2 steps that was the space between us and closed the distance. I wrapped my arms around Edward's neck as he placed his hands on my hips, lightly pulling myself closer to him. I looked him closely in the eye for a moment, saying with my eyes what words could not describe for him bringing me here, to his special place. Then we kissed. It was a different one compared to the few others that we have had, and I was sure that it topped the others, even our first kiss. My arms tightened around his neck as my lips landed smoothly on his, closing all distance between our bodies as they melded together like 2 complicated pieces to a jigsaw puzzle. Nobody was ever going to compare or fit into my piece, as I knew Edward would fill it out completely. Edward's freezing cold lips felt so wonderful on my warm ones, which even through the differences that our bodies held, it still created a burning desire in my entire being as his marble lips smoothed over mine. It was delightful and sinful in the same breath. When Edward's arms slowly released me from his sensuous captivity, I looked around some more. I had spent a good amount of my time on this earth with flowers and gardening. Mary Jane was always doing something to the flower beds and fixing the hanging pots, so I knew a fair amount about plants. "What are you thinking about?" I was jolted out of my thoughts with the casual buzzing of our mixed contact as Edward's arms encircled my waist once more. I leaned back against his body and smiled a lazy smile at the thought of how lucky I was to be here in this moment with him, my true love. How strange it is that I am actually here, with you. I don't believe in strange. I wasn't facing him, so I couldn't get a read on his expression. Strange is the unknown. My hand went up behind his back and I played with a few ends to his silky smooth hair. People don't understand that there are only strange things out there because those people are afraid and consider it strange. There wouldn't be strangers if everyone knew who everybody was. He kissed the side of my head as we continued to gaze out into the meadow. There is living proof that in this meadow that a strange possibility is always happening no matter the time or place. We can't predict the future. There will always be an unknown until that unknown is revealed and thoroughly understood. Like these beautiful flowers, it is extremely rare to see them anywheres but in their native home. I smiled. Again, people are too afraid to understand it, so they stay away. It's imperceptible of how much those people choose to understand, and the other parts of the unknown get locked away once again. He grasped my waist a little tighter in his strong arms. Are you afraid of being locked away? Nobody truly understands you. They might know what your actions are going to be or your neutral feelings on a subject. What is it that you want to do? What is it that you desire to do? I spun around to face Edward, my hands going to either side of his face, cupping the cold ice of his skin. There is an entire world out there that is perceived as strange and mysterious. I took a deep breath. What? I looked into his confused eyes. I could tell that I was scratching a surface that had never been touched before, something that he probably didn't even know he had. Something that Edward had probably kept dormant for many years, something strange inside of him. People only consider things strange because they don't understand it. It's something new, so it is considered strange and scary. I gazed into his eyes, trying to get my meaning across. Do you think that I could be considered scary? He looked scared himself at that moment. Not scary. Misunderstood. There is a comfort zone in which everyone has certain levels of calm. Everything outside of that is considered a frightening prospect. People know you as you want them to, not what you truly are, I elaborated. I am confused. His flustered eyes shone with determination. I hoped he was determined enough of what I am saying and piece it together. Everyone that meets you is under the immediate impression that you are scary, but you aren't, you are just misunderstood. Tell me, have you ever truly relaxed and let someone inside? Let someone know who you are? What you like and dislike? What your deepest passions are? I hugged myself close to him. Yes. You're a terrible liar. You are misunderstood because you put up a front, and that front has kept you from being yourself, most likely your entire life. I stroked his cheek tenderly. I don't know why, but you are the only person that has ever truly understood me in my life. You have figured me out in just weeks of knowing me, unraveled my greatest desire, my control that I have built my entire existence. It crumbles at my feet in front of you. My deepest desire is you. It has always been you. I have just been waiting for you to come along and save me. One of my most dominant urges is to see you, feel you, smell you. I only feel complete once I look into your eyes. I want to feel the warmth of your body on mine as we kiss, and feel the burn throughout my body as I touch your heart with my own. Edward didn't understand it a moment ago, but I was happy to note that he seemed to understand that we weren't just talking about the strange and scary parts of life. We were talking about him. Edward kissed me then. A kiss filled me with so much passion that I could feel the heavy drag of my heart as took on extra beats for him, and unconsciously curl my toes from the pleasure he was inflicting upon my body. Edward's arms wrapped smoothly around my waist as I melted against him, his icy body a shocking comparison to my warm-blooded body. His hands held me there, seemingly unwilling to let me go from his strong grasp. My hands tangled in his hair as I pulled him closer to me. When I started struggling to breathe, he pulled back and rested his head in the crook of my neck. Once I was able to calm down a little and catch my ragged breath, I moved my eyes to where he was still resting his head. My hands stayed in his hair as I stroked back and forth, soothing motions. I love you, I whispered against his hair. I will always love you. I don't love the wall you put up and hide behind, but I do love you, who you really are. Not who you pretend to be. I kissed the side of his head. Edward lifted his head and gazed into my eyes, his expression fierce. I love you, my Bella. I love your strength. I love your sincerity. I love your will. I cut him off with a kiss. My lips tingled when we broke apart like every time, and I smiled widely at him. You are special, I started. Not strange, to me. I kissed him lightly on the lips before pulling apart. My legs are getting kind of stiff. Do you mind if we sit? We had been here for a couple of hours now, and the slight aching in my foot was getting annoying. Besides, we had more ground to cover today. Edward flopped gracefully to the ground, sitting with his legs crossed, and then motioned for me to sit down. I sat down next to him, but was more than a little surprised to feel his arms picking me up and placing me on his lap. What? I flustered, surprised with the unexpected action. I want you closer to me, he whispered into my ear. I couldn't fight back my shiver. I turned towards him then, bracing myself. I had absolutely no idea how he was going to take the fact that I knew he was a vampire. Might as well just get it out in the open. I took another deep breath. Edward, I started. Bella, we both chuckled nervously as we spoke over one another. Go ahead. We both urged each other at the same time with a matching wave of our hands. Edward and I both laughed lightly at that. Edward wrapped both of hands around the curve of my waist and smiled encouragingly at me. Edward, I couldn't look him in the eye. All my former bravery was gone, and in its place was cowardice, as I thought that he would call me out on knowing for a long time and lying to him. I had a talk with a friend of mine a while ago. I cringed once I realized that I already said, a while ago. Go on, he urged, his hands grasping tighter to my flesh. Well, just wanted to say that he was very nice, I stuttered, chickening out at the last minute. You said you wanted to say something, go ahead. I waved my hand forward again, this time not meeting his gaze. Bella, slow down. Look at me, now. He moved his hand from my waist to my chin, lifting it. Please tell me what's on your mind. He was dazzling me again. It was very unfair. We just had a little chat. I tried to look away, but his eyes held me captive. A chat about what? Edward's eyes probed mine for answers. Just some old legends. This time I was able to look away, and kept my eyes firmly on his shirt. I twisted a loose thread at the bottom between my fingers for a moment, trying to catch my ragged breath and calm down. I knew he wasn't going to let this go now. What kind of legends? His usually velvety voice was currently sounding rather strained. We were at the beach. I smoothed my fingers along the string, trying to get it to straighten to no avail. It kept curling back in on itself, like my courage. Which beach? Edward's voice was tense, and I could feel the rigid muscle in his thigh as it flexed under my weight. La push, I squeaked. I was more than 90% sure he growled. Jacob was just going on about some local legends, and I thought of you. I waited impatiently for the ground to open up and swallow me whole. Edward was silent, reminding me very much of an icicle. I waited for him to thaw. Jacob talked about these werewolves and cold ones. I related the cold ones to you. I tucked my head under his chin and into his shirt. He could never forgive me for not telling him sooner. Bella? Edward wrapped his arms seemingly uncertainly around my waist, and held me close to him. His voice sounded panicked. How long did you know this for? Know what? My innocent act sounded faux, even to me. Know about what I am. His voice didn't lose the strained quality from earlier. Are you mad at me? I couldn't help but ask. Mad at you? Edward sounded incredulous as he repeated my question to himself. Why on earth would I be mad at you? Because I didn't tell you that I knew. My voice sounded scared and tiny, even to my own ears. Bella, I could never be mad at you. He pulled me impossibly closer to himself. So, I paused. You still love me even though I kept this from you? My fear started to diminish. I should be the one asking you if you still love me for the fact that I kept what I am from you. He kissed my head. Besides, he continued, I couldn't ever not love you. He kissed the same spot again. I let out a long breath, one that I must have been holding for a little while now. My muscles relaxed as I realized that this was a good step in our relationship, not one that I should have feared. Thank you, I breathed as I lifted my head and leaned in to kiss him lightly. I should be the one thanking you. He paused for a moment. Are you not scared of me? I can only be scared of something unknown. There is nothing unknown or scary about you that I don't love to pieces already. I grinned. Leaning in to give him a more searing kiss, he mimicked my movements as we laid there, tangled in the grass, in a now identified place. You are not strange to me, my love, I grinned, wrapping my arms around his neck so we could kiss a moment longer. Peter's pav. I glanced anxiously around the buildings, trying desperately to find out where the last one went. I cursed under my breath as I heard the telltale signs of a human heartbeat. How did he get so far away? The large thudding beat faster as I approached quickly. His instincts must have picked up. Even though I wasn't a danger to most humans, the bad ones would still have to deal with me. This robbery gang had hit the city twice this week, and since the police couldn't catch up with them, it was up to me. I had been at home with Mary Jane the first time they struck, but now I am back. The first 4 men went down easily, and I had already flagged down a police officer to finish the job here. The one I'm following now thought he would get away by running through several alleyways. Am I that underestimated? Surely he must have heard about the amazing Spider-Man? I don't mean to brag this up, but I do hold some pride for what I do here in the city. Quickly catching back up to him in a few seconds, I grasped the back of his shirt in my hand before flinging a web up near the entrance of the city. Throwing him lightly into it and trapping his hands with more webs was hastily completed before I flung myself up towards the top of the building. The authorities would find him there soon enough. Taking a running start at the top, I flung myself off the second building, narrowly missing the 2 heaters I squeezed past, and emitted a new web out onto the shop across the street. Something seemed off. My intuition was telling me that something was wrong, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up on end at the thoughts crossing my mind. I brought my gaze slowly around my surroundings, trying to find the danger. It usually wasn't this strong of an impulse when I come across a criminal, so I was left on edge as I twirled around and landed gracefully behind an old dresser. I preferred the sneak attacks on others, not on me. I swept my gaze around the area, but when I came across nothing, I relaxed my tense posture slightly. Still on edge, I walked around the area, discovering nothing of importance. My fingers and toes clinged to the brick building as I started climbing again so I could get back up to the top. A small noise alerted me to the fact that I was wrong in my earlier assessment. Jumping from halfway up, I growled. The low menacing sound went unnoticed to the person standing several yards in front of me. It was covered in metal, painted green, with one of the strangest masks I have ever seen covering its face. My growl was becoming more prominent. It didn't seem bothered by the noise. Spider-Man. He nodded at me in acknowledgement. His voice was rough and sounded like crunching gravel. I kept still, preparing myself. I have been looking for you for a while. You aren't the easiest person to find. His mask came down then, and I could see that his voice matched his face. His yellow eyes shone with excitement at the revelation that he had indeed found me. Why were you trying to find me? I kept my poker face up. I didn't trust this man for a second. Because you're Spider-Man, he pronounced my public name slowly and deliberately. And you are? I was mentally storing this conversation away for later. He tapped his chin thoughtfully, and then grinned. Goblin. The end, guys. Let me know your reviews in comment section.